Hello, I am the Wizard of Tales, and I'm here to guide you today. I know this video is the perfect companion to help my dear dreamers relax and drift off to sleep. Before we dive into a world of calm and serenity, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, get cozy, take a deep breath, and let the magic of stories embrace you. In 19th century London, where the smoke from the chimneys danced against the grey sky and the cobbled streets echoed with the sounds of carriages, the Darling family lived in a modest but cozy house. Winnie Darling, a 12-year-old girl with bright eyes and an even brighter imagination, shared a room with her younger brothers. John, a 10-year-old who dreamed of pirate adventures, and Michael, the 6-year-old who still cuddled his teddy bear every night. Mrs. Darling was a loving mother who every night carefully stored her children's dreams in little imaginary drawers in their minds, while telling them stories before bed. Mr. Darling, although somewhat strict with finances and concerned with appearances, had a kind heart hidden beneath his austere exterior. The family also had Nana, a devoted Saint Bernard dog who served as the children's nanny, an unusual arrangement that often embarrassed Mr. Darling in front of the neighbors. One particularly starry night, while Mrs. Darling was putting the children to bed, she noticed a strange shadow dancing in the room. It was no ordinary shadow. It seemed to have a life of its own, and even more curiously, it didn't belong to anyone in the room. When she tried to catch it, it flew out of the window like a frightened bird. Mrs. Darling held this event close to her heart, worried about what it might mean. The stories Winnie told her brothers every night were full of pirates, fairies, and extraordinary adventures. She had a special gift for storytelling, transforming the children's rooms into pirate ships, enchanted forests, and mysterious caves through her words. John and Michael hung on every word, their eyes wide with excitement as their imaginations flew to faraway, magical places. It was on one of these evenings, when their parents had gone out for an important dinner, that something extraordinary happened. A golden glow, no bigger than a butterfly, came through the bedroom window, followed by a boy dressed in leaves and vines. He floated in the air as if gravity were just a polite suggestion that he preferred to ignore. His name was Peter Pan, and he was looking for something. "My shadow," he exclaimed, scanning the corners of the room. "Have you seen her around?" Wendy, who was only pretending to sleep, sat up in bed amazed. The boy didn't look much older than her, but there was something in his eyes, a mixture of wild joy and ancient loneliness, that made him unlike anyone she had ever met. The little golden light that accompanied him was Tinker Bell, a fairy with a strong temper and even stronger jealousy. She tinkled furiously when she saw Peter's interest in Wendy, although only he seemed to understand her language of bells. When Wendy found the shadow tucked away in her mother's drawer and helped Peter sew it back on, after a few unsuccessful attempts by him to glue it on with soap, an instant friendship was formed. Peter told them about Neverland, a place where children never grew up, where there were adventures every day, and where he led a group of lost boys, children who had fallen out of their baby carriages and were never reclaimed. "Why don't you come with me?" Peter asked, hovering in the air with a mischievous grin. "You can tell stories to the lost boys, and your brothers can join in our adventures." The offer was tempting. Winnie looked at her brothers, who were already awake and excited at the possibility. The idea of never having to grow up, of living in a place where adventure was always lurking, was irresistible to children. But there were dangers in Neverland that Peter mentioned casually, as if they were part of the fun. Captain Hook and his pirates, who swore revenge on Peter after he cut off the captain's hand and threw it to a crocodile. The same crocodile that now followed Hook everywhere, having developed a particular taste for pirates and a ticking clock in his stomach. There were also the Indians from Tiger Lily's tribe, the mermaids with their enchanting voices and whimsical personalities, and the fairies who, as Tinker Bell clearly demonstrated, could be as temperamental as they were beautiful. "But how will we get there?" asked John, adjusting his glasses enthusiastically. "By flying, of course," replied Peter, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "All it takes is a happy thought and a little fairy dust." Tinker Bell, still annoyed, was persuaded to share her magic dust with the children. Soon, Wendy, John and Michael discovered that they could float, first clumsily, banging against the ceiling, then more gracefully as they learned to control their direction. The decision was made in a moment of pure childish magic and excitement. Worries about their parents, growing up, and the responsibilities of the adult world seemed distant and unimportant in the face of the promise of eternal adventure. As the children followed Peter out of the window, climbing higher and higher into London's night sky, they left behind not only their home, but also the ordered and predictable world of the Victorian era. Ahead of them was the second star on the right, shining like a beacon to Neverland, where time worked differently and adventure awaited around every corner. What they didn't know was that this impulsive decision would lead them to discoveries about themselves, the value of family, and the true meaning of growing up. Lessons none of them expected to learn when they left the comfort of their rooms that starry night. The journey to Neverland was an experience the darling children would never forget. Flying above the clouds, following Peter Pan through the starry sky, they discovered a completely new world. The air became thinner and shinier as they approached the second star on the right, and a magical sensation overtook their bodies. Michael clutched his teddy bear tightly as he flew, occasionally letting out squeals of delight as he plunged through the soft clouds. John maintained a posture that tried to look serious, like an explorer on an important expedition, but his eyes sparkled with excitement at each new discovery. Wendy, for her part, watched Peter with fascination, noticing how he seemed perfectly at ease in the air, as if he had been born to fly. Tinker Bell continued to show her displeasure, flying ahead of the group and occasionally casting annoyed glances at Wendy. Her golden glow flashed more brightly when Peter approached her to help her with some stronger air currents. "It's just over there," announced Peter, pointing to a bright spot on the horizon. As they got closer, Neverland began to take shape before their amazed eyes. It was an island that seemed to have been plucked straight out of children's most fantastic dreams. Snow-capped mountains on one side, golden beaches on the other, a dense rainforest in the center, and a crystal-clear lagoon where mermaids swam lazily. Anchored in a cove was Captain Hook's imposing pirate ship, the Jolly Roger, its black sails fluttering ominously in the wind. In the forest, smoke rose in spirals from the teepees of the indigenous tribe, and small points of light indicated where the fairies lived among the trees. Peter led the children to their secret hiding place, a hollow tree that served as the entrance to the Lost Boys' underground house. Before entering, however, they had to quickly hide behind some rocks. A group of pirates were patrolling the area. "That's Mr. Smee," whispered Peter, pointing to a short, pudgy pirate with round glasses. "He's Captain Hook's first mate. He's not very bright, but he's loyal to the captain." The pirates went on muttering about looking for Peter Pan and his new shadow, not realizing that the object of their search was only a few meters away, holding back their laughter along with their new friends. When the way was clear, Peter led them to the secret entrance. Each child went down a different natural slide, landing on soft cushions made of leaves and feathers. Inside the hideout, 6 boys of varying ages, all dressed in animal skins and makeshift clothes, welcomed the visitors with a mixture of curiosity and enthusiasm. "Lost Boys, meet Wendy, John, and Michael," announced Peter proudly. "Wendy will be our new mother, and she'll tell us stories every night." The Lost Boys, Lightly, Toodles, Nibs, Curly, and the twins, immediately surrounded Wendy with requests for stories and questions about what it was like to have a real mother. John was quickly embroiled in a discussion about pirate combat tactics, while Michael found a cozy corner to sit with his teddy bear, watching everything with wide eyes. The underground house was an extraordinary place, decorated with treasures found all over the island. Colorful mermaid shells, exotic feathers from birds never seen before, hand-drawn maps showing secret hiding places, and even some jewels borrowed from the pirates. Wendy, naturally taking on the maternal role that Peter had assigned her, began to organize things. She noticed that the boys needed a bath, their clothes needed mending, and the place needed a good clean. But before she could begin any of these tasks, a distant sound caught everyone's attention. Tick-tick, the Lost Boys were instantly on alert. "It's the crocodile," explained Nibs in an excited whisper. It must be chasing Captain Hook again. Peter flew to one of the secret windows of the hideout and confirmed it. The fearsome Captain Hook was running along the beach, his red coat fluttering in the wind, while the huge crocodile chased him with a hungry expression. The sound of the clock in his stomach echoed around the island, serving as a constant warning to the captain. "Why don't we take advantage of him being distracted to explore the ship?" suggested Peter with a mischievous grin. The idea was met with shouts of approval from the Lost Boys and a worried look from Wendy. "Isn't it dangerous?" she asked, thinking of her younger brothers. "Everything's an adventure in Neverland," replied Peter, already floating towards the exit. "Besides, you still have a lot of fairy dust on you. If anything goes wrong, you can just fly away." And so, before Wendy could protest further, the whole group was on their way to the Jolly Roger, flying low over the waters of the Mermaid Lagoon. The aquatic creatures raised their heads to watch them pass, their colorful hair glistening in the sun, but there was something about their smiles that made Wendy shudder. They didn't look entirely friendly. As they approached the pirate ship, the sun began to set on Neverland, painting the sky with impossible colors and casting long shadows over the water. The adventure that awaited them was only the beginning of a series of events that would test not only their courage, but also the bonds they were beginning to form in this magical place, where time stood still and children never had to grow up. Or so they thought. As they approached the Jolly Roger, Peter signaled for everyone to remain silent. The pirate ship was even more impressive up close, with its black sails and elaborate carvings in the dark wood. Most of the crew had left in search of the captain, leaving only a few sleepy pirates standing guard on deck. Peter, an expert at mischief, led the group to Captain Hook's cabin. The place was luxurious, decorated with maps, treasures, and an impressive collection of red coats. In the center was a table with a detailed map of Neverland, marked with mysterious X's and annotations in the captain's elaborate handwriting. "Look at this," whispered John, adjusting his glasses as he examined a golden compass on the table. Michael, for his part, was fascinated by a small globe that rotated magically, showing lands that didn't even exist on ordinary maps. When he noticed something different, a half-open diary on the captain's desk. Curious, she approached it and began to read a few passages. To her surprise, she discovered that Hook hadn't always been a cruel pirate. Years ago, he had been a respected explorer, transformed by bitterness after his fateful encounter with Peter Pan. Meanwhile, the Lost Boys rummaged through drawers and chests, finding all kinds of treasure. Tinker Bell flew around, her golden light illuminating dark corners of the cabin, although she still cast suspicious glances at Wendy. Suddenly, they heard voices approaching. "The captain's coming back," warned Curly, one of the Lost Boys, his eyes wide with fear. "Quick, hide," ordered Peter, as the children looked for places to hide. Wendy, John, and Michael hid behind a heavy curtain, while the Lost Boys squeezed inside an empty truck. Peter floated up to the ceiling, blending into the shadows, and Tinker Bell hid inside a lantern. Captain Hook entered his cabin, panting and irritated after yet another crocodile chase. His long black hair was disheveled, and his metal hook glinted menacingly in the light of the lanterns. Mr. Smee followed him closely, trying to calm him down. "That damned reptile," shouted Hook, throwing his hat on the table. "And all because of that pestilent Peter Pan. Oh, if I could only get my hand on him." "Calm down, Captain," tried Smee, pouring himself a cup of tea. "You need some rest, sir. How about some music on your harpsichord?" Hook sat down heavily in his chair, but something caught his eye. "Smee," he said slowly, "did you go through my things?" Winnie's heart raced. The compass that John had examined was out of place, and some drawers weren't completely closed. "No, Captain, don't even go near your things, not me," replied Smee, confused. Hook stood up, his shrewd eyes scanning the cabin. "So we have visitors," he muttered, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "And I bet I know exactly who they are." The captain began to walk around the cabin, banging his hook against furniture and walls. As he approached the curtain where Wendy and her brothers were hiding, Michael couldn't hold back a sneeze. "Whoa!" exclaimed Hook, pulling back the curtain. At that moment, Peter Pan descended from the ceiling like a bolt of lightning, kicking off the captain's head. "Now," he shouted, and chaos ensued in the cabin. The lost boys jumped out of the trunk, throwing objects and making a mess. Tinkerbell flew in circles around Smee's head, disorientating him. Wendy, John, and Michael took advantage of the distraction to run to the cabin window. "Happy thought," reminded Peter, as he threw more fairy dust at them. The children began to float away, escaping through the window one by one. Hook, furious, tried to reach them with his hook. "Come back here, you little pests." "Smee, call the crew." Peter was the last to leave, but not without one last taunt. He took the captain's favorite hat and placed it on his own head, bowing mockingly. "See you later, old man," he laughed, flying out the window. The escape was exciting, with the children flying in zigzags to dodge the shots of the pirates who had climbed onto the deck. The cannonballs exploded in the water around them, creating big splashes that got them wet, but nobody cared. They were all laughing at the adventure. When they finally reached their hiding place, they fell to the ground laughing and panting. John was still holding the compass he had borrowed from the captain, and Michael was hugging his teddy bear that had almost been left behind in the confusion. "That was incredible," exclaimed Nibs, jumping up and down with excitement. Wendy, although she also found the adventure exciting, couldn't stop thinking about the captain's diary. There was more to Huck than met the eye, and she wondered if Peter knew the whole story. Night fell in Neverland, and the children gathered around a makeshift fire inside the hideout. Wendy began to tell stories, but this time she included one about a man who had lost his way and turned into something he had never planned to be. Peter watched from his special chair, made of intertwined branches, but his gaze was distant, as if he too was lost in thought about the past, or perhaps about the future he refused to have. The sound of the crocodile's clock echoed in the distance, mingling with the singing of mermaids and the tinkling of fairies, creating the nocturnal symphony characteristic of Neverland. As the children began to fall asleep, no one noticed a shadowy figure watching the hideout from afar through a telescope. Captain Hook had found his hideout, and a plan was beginning to form in his vengeful mind. The next morning, the hideout was bustling with preparations for a big treasure hunt that Peter had planned. He had discovered an old map in one of Captain Hook's trunks during his raid on the ship, and was eager to share the adventure with everyone. Wendy was organizing provisions for the journey, preparing small parcels with fruit and bread that the lost boys had borrowed from the Indian village. John studied the compass stolen from the pirate ship, determined to be the expedition's official navigator, while Michael helped the twins tie ropes and prepare makeshift backpacks with large sheets of paper. "The treasure is hidden beyond Skull Rock," explained Peter, pointing to the worn map. "We'll have to pass through Mermaid Lagoon and cross Indian territory." Tinker Bell hovered over the map, her golden glow revealing secret markings that could only be seen with fairy light. She still maintained her protective attitude towards Peter, but had begun to tolerate Wendy's presence a little more, especially after the girl had sewn a little petal dress for her. The group set off at sunrise, with Peter leading the way through the air. The children alternated between flying and walking, saving the remaining fairy dust on their clothes. The first stop would be the Mermaid Lagoon, where they would need to get a special pearl which, according to the map, was necessary to open the treasure chest. As they approached the lagoon, the group hid behind some rocks to watch the mermaids. They were beautiful creatures, but Winnie had already realized that their beauty hid a dangerous nature. The mermaids played with each other, combing their long, colorful hair with combs made of coral and singing mesmerizing melodies. "I'm going," whispered Wendy, surprising everyone. "They're more hostile towards boys, but maybe I can negotiate with them." Peter hesitated, but nodded, respecting Wendy's courage. She approached the water's edge, and the mermaids immediately noticed her. One of them, with aqua green hair and a crown of shells, swam closer. "An earth girl," said the mermaid, her voice melodious but with a tone of disdain. "What do you want in our domain?" Wendy explained about the pearl, and to her surprise, the mermaids laughed. "Ah, yes, the magic pearl," said the crown mermaid. "We can give it to you, but it comes at a price. We want to hear a story we've never heard before." Wendy smiled, for storytelling was her specialty. She began to tell a tale about a young mermaid who fell in love with a human prince, a story she had read at home before coming to Neverland. The mermaids were completely fascinated, having never heard a story about one of their kind. Enchanted by the narrative, they gave Wendy the pearl, a luminescent jewel that seemed to contain moonlight itself inside. With the first part of their mission accomplished, the group headed towards the Indians' territory. On the way, however, they began to notice strange signs. Unnaturally broken branches, footprints that didn't belong to the island's animals, and an unsettling silence in the forest. Peter, his senses sharpened by life in Neverland, realized that something was wrong. "It's a trap," he whispered, signaling for everyone to stop. Hook followed us here. He had barely finished speaking when nets fell over them, and pirates sprang up on all sides. Captain Hook emerged from the shadows, his hook glinting menacingly. Well, he smiled mischievously. "Looks like my little plan worked perfectly. Did you really believe that map had been stolen? I'll let you find it." The children struggled in their hammocks while Tinker Bell flew around frantically, trying to find a way to help. Peter managed to free himself with his dagger, but before he could help the others, he had to fend off Hook's attacks. "This time, Pan, there's no escape," shouted the captain, engaging Peter in a sword duel. Wendy, remaining calm, realized that she still had the mermaid pearl in her pocket. Remembering the stories her mother used to tell her about magical objects, she squeezed the pearl tightly and made a wish. To everyone's amazement, the pearl began to shine brightly, and its glow attracted the attention of the nearby mermaids. The aquatic creatures, feeling connected to their magical pearl, emerged from the lagoon and began to sing. Their music was different now, not to attract but to confuse and disorient the pirates. The sailors, affected by the melody, began to stagger and drop their weapons, giving the children a chance to free themselves from the nets. Even Captain Hook seemed momentarily stunned, allowing Peter to gain the upper hand in the duel. "Now," shouted Peter, and all those who still had enough fairy dust took off. Those who couldn't fly were carried by the others, forming a curious aerial chain that moved quickly away from danger. Hook, recovering from the effect of the siren's music, shouted orders to his disoriented crew, but it was too late. The group was far enough away, although they could hear the captain's furious shouts echoing across the island. They landed in a safe clearing, all panting but laughing at the adventure and danger they had just escaped. Winnie held the pearl with even more affection now, realizing that its magic was more powerful than they had imagined. "You were amazing," Peter exclaimed to Wendy, with a genuine admiration that made Tinker Bell tinkle with renewed jealousy. But the adventure wasn't over yet. The map, although it had been Hook's trap, had revealed something real through Tinker Bell's light. Ancient markings that indicated a real treasure, one that Captain Hook himself didn't know about. As the sun began to set on Neverland, the group prepared for the next stage of their adventure. Now, with the magic pearl in their possession and knowledge of the map's true markings, they were closer than ever to discovering one of the island's greatest secrets. With the secret map markings revealed by Tinker Bell's light, the group headed towards the snowy mountains of Neverland. The real treasure, according to ancient inscriptions, was hidden in a cave near the highest peak. Peter led the way, occasionally stopping to help the others climb more difficult sections. "It's colder up here," observed Michael, hugging his teddy bear tighter. Wendy, ever attentive, improvised scars with large, soft leaves they had brought from the forest. As they climbed, the tropical vegetation gave way to rocks covered in snow and ice. The magical pearl in Wendy's possession emitted a soft glow that seemed more intense as they neared the top, as if responding to the proximity of something equally magical. John, consulting the stolen compass, noticed something strange. "The needle is spinning nonstop," he said, frowning, as if there was some kind of powerful magnetic force nearby. The Lost Boys, who would normally be the first to complain after a long walk, were unusually quiet and determined. There was something in the air, a feeling that they were about to discover something truly extraordinary. When they finally reached the entrance to the cave indicated on the map, they were greeted by an astonishing sight. Crystals of every possible color grew from the walls, creating a spectacle of light and color as Tinker Bell flew between them. In the center of the cave, there was an ice pedestal with an ancient chest. "That's it," exclaimed Peter, flying up to the pedestal. But when he tried to open the chest, he discovered that it was sealed by some kind of ancient magic. The pearl, reminded Wendy. That must be why we needed it. When Wendy brought the pearl close to the lock on the chest, something extraordinary happened. The crystals in the cave began to pulsate with a light of their own, and an ethereal voice filled the room. To open this true treasure, everyone must offer something precious, not of material value, but from the heart. The children looked at each other, confused at first, but gradually understanding the meaning of those words. One by one, they began to make their offerings. Michael was the first, placing his beloved teddy bear on the pedestal. John offered the compass, not for the object itself, but for what it represented, his search for direction and knowledge. The lost boys offered small mementos they kept from their lives before Neverland. A shiny button, a faded photo, a small spinning top. Wendy hesitated for a moment before offering something she always carried with her. A small thimble her mother had given her, a symbol of the family love she had left behind. Tinkerbell, surprising everyone, offered some of her own fairy scales, which shone like shooting stars. Peter Pan was the last. He hovered over the pedestal, struggling internally with something that seemed difficult to express. Finally, he took from his neck a necklace made of simple cord, from which hung a small rusty key. "It's the key to my house," he explained, his voice trembling slightly. "The house I left so long ago, when I decided never to grow up." When the last offering was made, the whole cave began to glow, and the chest slowly opened. Inside, there was no gold or jewels, but something much more valuable: memories. Memories crystallized in the form of light, showing precious moments in the lives of each one of them. They saw their families, their homes, moments of joy, and even sadness that they had forgotten or chosen to ignore. For the lost boys, it was the first time in years that they could clearly remember where they came from. For Wendy, John, and Michael, it was a painful but necessary reminder of the love they had left behind. Peter watched everything with an expression that mixed fascination and fear. For the first time, he could clearly see his own memories. A mother waiting with the window open, night after night, waiting for the return of the son who had chosen to fly away. It was at that moment that a familiar sound broke the spell of the moment, the clang of swords and pirate shouts echoing across the mountain. Captain Hook had followed in their footsteps in the snow. "He never gives up," sighed Nibs, preparing for another fight. But something had changed. The memories they had witnessed brought new understanding, especially for Wendy. She remembered Hook's diary, the words that revealed a lost man, not unlike the children who refused to grow up. "Wait," she said, holding Peter's arm as he drew his dagger. Maybe there's another way." When Hook and his men burst into the cave, they found not a group in battle position, but children standing around a chest of lights. Wendy stepped forward, holding the mermaid pearl. "Captain," she called, "there's something you need to see." The light of memories enveloped Hook, showing him not only his past as a respected explorer, but also the exact moment when he let bitterness transform his heart. It was a choice he had made, just as Peter had chosen never to grow up, just as each of them had made their own choices. Neverland, they finally understood, was not just a place to escape from growing up, but a place to understand that growing up didn't mean losing magic. It meant learning to carry it in a new way. The last lights of the day penetrated the cave entrance, painting everyone in golden hues. At that moment, suspended between childhood and what was to come, each of them faced a choice: to remain forever in the shadows of what they had been, or to take a step towards what they could become. And so, in Neverland, where time worked in mysterious ways and magic was in every breath, a new story began to be written. No longer about never growing up, but about growing up in the right way, carrying with them the precious memories of childhood like a treasure more valuable than all the pirates' gold. In the beginning, there was only the vast ocean plunged into infinite darkness. The black waters stretched as far as the eye could see, and the silence was broken only by the gentle movement of the waves that danced eternally without destination. In this primordial setting, a single being stood out, the raven, a majestic creature with black feathers that reflected what little light there was in the void. This was no ordinary crow. Its eyes shone with ancient wisdom, and its wings carried the power of creation itself. Kokoro, as it was known in ancient languages, had emerged from the shadows themselves, born from a thought of the universe. His solitude was his only companion as he flew over the infinite ocean, observing his own reflection in the dark waters. For eons that could not be measured, Kokoro flew without rest, this curious mind constantly searching for something beyond the monotony of darkness. In her heart, a burning desire for change grew, then inexplicable will to transform that emptiness into something more. It was then, in a moment of deep contemplation, that he realized he was not alone in his journey. From the depths of the ocean, an ancient voice emerged, as old as time itself. It was Namaka, the spirit of the primordial waters, who had long been watching Raven in his solitary flight. His presence was manifested through gentle ripples on the surface of the sea, forming patterns that only Kokoro could interpret. "Why do you fly aimlessly, Shadow Architect?" asked Namaka, his voice echoing across the waters. "What are you looking for in this infinite void?" Kokoro landed on a wave that hung suspended, like a liquid throne created especially for him. "I seek purpose," he replied, his words carrying the weight of 1,000 thoughts. "This world is too vast to remain in the shadows." It was at this moment that Kokoro discovered his true nature. In his wings slept the power to turn dreams into reality. In his beak he carried the ability to shape the shapeless. And in his heart, he held the desire to create something extraordinary. On the endless horizon, Kokoro saw something that no one else could see. 3 small points of light, so distant that they seemed like an illusion. They were the celestial boxes, mystical containers that held the secrets of luminosity. Raven knew, either by instinct or fate, that these objects held the key to transforming that world of darkness. Namaka, sensing Kokoro's thoughts, became restless. "The heavenly boxes are sacred," she warned, her waters shimmering with concern. "They were sealed by the ancients, those who came before us. Disturbing them could bring consequences that even I cannot foresee." But Kokoro had already made up his mind. With a determined flap of his wings, he launched himself towards the heavenly boxes. His journey would not be easy. The shadows themselves seemed to want to keep him away, creating air currents that tried to divert his course. The wind howled with ancient voices, warning of the dangers of his endeavor. As he flew, Kokoro began to understand that it wasn't just the darkness that needed to be transformed. It was the very fabric of reality that was crying out for change. In his flight, he could feel the weight of responsibility on his wings. He was not just a creator, but a guardian of what was to come. The waters beneath him began to churn more strongly, as if the ocean itself was responding to his determination. Namaka, although worried, couldn't help but admire Raven's courage. She knew that this moment would mark the beginning of a new era, for better or worse. As she approached the heavenly boxes, Kokoro could feel the ancient energy emanating from them. Each one pulsed with a different kind of light. One was golden like the brightest sun, another silver like the most delicate moonlight, and the third sparkled with thousands of tiny points of light, like the stars that were yet to be born. The challenge before him was monumental. The boxes were protected by mystical seals, created to resist the passage of time in attempts to tamper with them. But Kokoro was no ordinary being. In his essence, he carried the very force of creation, a gift that even he didn't fully understand. Namaka watched everything with growing apprehension. The waters under her domain moved in increasingly complex patterns, reflecting her restlessness. She knew that the balance of the void was about to be altered forever, and the consequences of this change would be irreversible. With a precise movement, Kokoro reached the first box. His bright eyes studied the intricate patterns that sealed it, trying to understand its secrets. He knew that his every action from that moment on would shape not only the physical world, but also the fate of all beings yet to come. The first seal began to crack under his touch, releasing a thin beam of golden light that cut through the darkness like a sharp blade. It was only the beginning of a transformation that would change the face of that primordial universe forever. Kokoro, the architect of shadows, was about to take the first step on his journey of creation, a journey that would lead him to shape mountains, bring forests to life, and populate the world with beings of all shapes and sizes. The wind whispered ancient prophecies, and the waters danced with renewed energy. The moment of creation had arrived, and with it, the dawn of a new era was about to awaken in the hands, or rather, the wings of the most unlikely of creators, a raven who dared to defy the darkness. The beam of golden light that escaped from the first celestial box grew with every moment, like a primordial dawn that had never been witnessed before. Kokoro kept his beak firmly attached to the seal, his black feathers now bathed in the radiant glow emanating from the box. The power contained therein was greater than he had imagined, and for a brief moment, he felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of his own daring. Namaka watched in fascination and awe as the waters around him began to reflect that strange new light, creating dancing patterns on their surface that had never existed before. "Are you sure you're ready for the consequences of your actions, Kokoro?" His voice echoed across the waves, carrying both concern and reverence. Raven didn't answer immediately, concentrating on his task. With a precise and determined movement, he finally managed to completely break the first seal. The golden box opened in a spectacle of light and heat, releasing the sun in all its primordial glory. The incandescent sphere rose slowly over the dark horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange for the first time. The heat of the newborn sun warmed Kokoro's wings, and he felt a deep satisfaction at seeing his first act of creation manifest itself so majestically. The waters below began to glow with golden reflections, creating a spectacle never before seen in that primordial world. Without wasting any time, Raven turned his attention to the second box, the one that held the moon. The seal on this one was different, more subtle and delicate, as if it had been woven with silver threads. Kokoro realized that he would need a gentler approach this time. Using the tip of his ward, he began to carefully unravel the mystical patterns that held the box shut. As he worked, he noticed that the sun was beginning to establish its first cycle, moving slowly across the newly formed sky. It was crucial that he release the moon before the first night arrived, to maintain the delicate balance that was beginning to form. "The tides respond to your creation," observed Namaka, his waters moving in new rhythms, attracted by the gravitational pull of the sun. "The world is changing, Kokoro, and there's no turning back." Raven knew she was right. His every action was creating new natural laws, establishing patterns that would last for eternity. With even more determination, he focused on the seal of the second box. Its silver feathers glowed with a light of their own now, as if they were absorbing the essence of the moon that was still trapped there. Finally, the second seal gave way, and the silver box opened with a soft sigh. The moon emerged, a pale, serene sphere that began its ascent into the darkening sky. Its soft light created a perfect contrast with the intense brightness of the sun that was now setting for the first time. Kokoro watched in amazement as his first two creations established a celestial dance, a cosmic ballet that would mark the rhythm of life for all the ages to come. Day and night were born at that moment, bringing with them concepts that hadn't existed before. Time, cycles, change. Only the third box remained, the one containing the stars. This one was different from the others, its surface sparkling with thousands of tiny points of light, as if it could no longer contain the energy it held inside. The seal on this last box was the most complex of the three, an intricate web of energy that seemed to change shape every time Kokoro looked at it. Namaka noticed Raven's hesitation at this latest challenge. "The stars are different," she warned, their waters reflecting the combined brilliance of the sun and moon. "They carry not only light, but also dreams and destinies. They are the weavers of stories yet to come." Kokoro understood that this last release would be the most significant. The stars would not just be points of light in the sky. They would be beacons of hope, guides for travelers, inspiration for the dreamers who would one day inhabit the world he was creating. With a delicacy that contrasted with his imposing form, the raven began to work on the last seal. His wings moved with surgical precision, undoing the mystical knots one by one. The process was slow and required all his concentration, as one false move could result in cosmic chaos. As the seal came undone, tiny points of light began to escape, like little sighs of eternity. Each star that broke free found its place in the vast night sky, gradually forming the constellations that would tell the stories of the universe. Kokoro's work was almost complete, but he knew that this was only the beginning of his journey as a creator. Light had been brought into the world, but there was still much to be done. The infinite waters begged for land, the vast empty expanses cried out for life, and the primordial silence longed for voices to fill it. The last star found its place in the firmament, completing the great work of illuminating the world. Kokoro hovered for a moment, his wings outstretched, admiring the transformation he had accomplished. The universe now pulsed with a new and vibrant energy, a rhythm that he himself had established. Namaka moved his waters in a pattern that suggested approval. "You have brought light into the world, architect," she said, her voice carrying a new tone of respect. "But the darkness still has its place and its purpose. The balance you have created is perfect." Raven knew she was right. The darkness had not been eliminated, but transformed into something just as precious. The night, with its silver moon and twinkling stars, was just as important as the sunny day. It was in this balance that the true beauty of his creation lay. While resting on a gentle wave, Kokoro was already beginning to plan his next great work. His keen eyes focused on the depths of the ocean, where he knew he would find the necessary elements for his next creation. The mainland was waiting to emerge, and with it, a new chapter in the history of the world was about to begin. With his gaze fixed on the depths of the ocean, Kokoro began his descent into the dark waters. Her wings, still shimmering with the reflection of the celestial lights she had released, cut through the air in precise movements. The world was different now, no longer plunged in perpetual darkness, but in a harmonious cycle of light and shadow. Namaka sensed the approach of the raven, and its waters opened gently, like a silent invitation. "The depths hold ancient secrets," she whispered across the waves. "What do you seek in the bowels of the ocean, creator?" Kokoro dipped her wings into the warm waters, feeling the primal energy that pulsed in the underwater currents. "I seek the substance from which the earth will be born," he replied, his voice reverberating through the waters. "This world needs more than just sky and sea." The raven's dive was deep and determined. As he descended, the waters became denser and colder. The light he had brought to the world barely penetrated these depths, creating a realm of shadows reminiscent of the beginning of time. But now, these shadows were no longer an endless void. They were a mystery to be explored. At the bottom of the ocean, Kokoro found what he was looking for: a dense, dark mass, a mixture of sand, rocks, and minerals that had lain dormant since the beginning of time. With his powerful beak, he began to work this primordial matter, shaping it with the same precision he had used to release the celestial lights. Namaka watched with growing interest as the raven worked. Its waters danced around him, sometimes helping, sometimes testing his resolve with unexpected currents. "The land you seek to create will forever change the face of the world," she commented. "My waters will have to learn new ways." The work was hard, but Kokoro didn't give up. Little by little, he began to push the mass up towards the surface. As it rose, the matter began to transform, hardening and taking shape under the influence of air and light. First a rocky peak emerged, then another and another. The sun, on its first full pass through the sky, witnessed the birth of the first mountains. Their dark slopes rose from the waters like sleeping giants, dripping primordial water back into the ocean. The moon, in its first cycle, bathed the new lands in its silvery light, revealing valleys and plains that formed between the peaks. But Kokoro knew that bare earth wasn't enough. With his wings, he began to spread different types of soil over the basic rock. Here a layer of fertile earth, there a bed of clay, further on a field of sand. Each type of soil had its purpose in the grand plan that was developing in his creative mind. The stars, watching from above, seemed to twinkle with approval as the world below them gained more complexity and texture. Their reflections in Namaka's waters created patterns that inspired Kokoro to continue his creative work. "I see the purpose in your work," said Namaka, his waves now crashing against the new rocky shores. "But I also see that this is only the beginning. The land you raise from my depths is still bare and empty." Raven landed on the highest peak of the first mountain he had created. From this privileged vantage point, he could see his creation stretching out in all directions. The lands that emerged from the waters formed complex patterns: archipelagos, peninsulas, deep valleys, and vast plains. With a flick of his wings, Kokoro began to create rivers and lakes, natural channels where the waters of Namaka could flow and settle over the new land. These waterways would be the veins of the world, bringing life and nutrients to every corner of his creation. "Every drop that flows over your land carries a promise," observed Namaka, feeling its waters divide and find new paths across the newborn continent. "I see the potential for life in every stream and lake you create." Namaka's words touched something deep in Raven's heart. Yes, life, this would be his next great challenge. But before he could take this step, he needed to prepare the ground properly. With meticulous care, he began to work on the texture of the earth, creating different environments that would one day house different forms of life. Using his powers of creation, he shaped caves in the bowels of the mountains, carved fertile valleys between the elevations, and created plains that stretched to the horizon. Each environment had its own personality, its own story to tell. The sun completed another cycle, and the moon once again bathed the new land in its silvery light. The stars continued their eternal dance in the sky, silent witnesses to Raven's tireless work. Every moment, the world took on more detail, more complexity. Kokoro knew that his work with the earth was almost complete, but something was still missing. The rocky surfaces and bare soil cried out for cover, for color, for life. His keen eye could already see the forests that would grow on the mountain slopes, the fields that would flourish on the plains, the algae that would dance in the shallows. With his wings spread, capturing the combined energy of the sun and the moon, the Raven was preparing for his next great work. The creation of plant life would be his next challenge, and he could already feel the creative energy flowing through his feathers. Eager to begin this new phase of his creative journey, Namaka, sensing Kokoro's thoughts, moved his waters in a pattern that suggested expectation. "You have shaped the earth wisely," she said, her waves gently caressing the new shores. "Now it's time to cover it with the green mantle of life." Raven nodded silently, his eyes shining with the reflection of the stars. The stage was set for the next act of creation, and he couldn't wait to start painting his world with the colors of life. With his unwavering determination, Kokoro began his next act of creation. Hovering over the newly formed earth, he could feel the life energy pulsing through his black feathers. The bare soil was eagerly awaiting the touch that would transform it into a verdant paradise. First, Raven focused his attention on the banks where land and water met. With delicate movements of his wings, he scattered the first seeds of life, small algae and mosses that quickly established themselves on the damp rocks. These first life forms were simple, but fundamental to what was to come. "I see you start at the beginning," observed Namaka, his waters gently nurturing the new green creatures. "As always, your wisdom shows in the details." Kokoro continued his methodical work, gradually moving from the banks to the interior. In each different type of soil he had created, he now planted a specific variety of plant life. On the rocky slopes, he planted resistant lichens and small plants that clung to the rocks with fierce determination. As his work progressed, the plants began to evolve and diversify of their own accord, as if they had captured Raven's creative essence. Small shoots grew into bushes, which in turn inspired the birth of ever larger trees. The first forests began to appear on the slopes of the mountains. With a mixture of sun, rain, and fertile soil created the perfect conditions for growth. Kokoro watched with satisfaction as different species of trees established themselves. Some tall and majestic, others twisted and ancient in their wisdom. Each plant has its own spirit, he murmured, landing briefly on a newly formed bridge. Each one tells its own story. On the plains, ravens sowed vast fields of grasses that rippled in the wind like the waters of Namaka. The prairies stretched to the horizon, their colors changing with the passing of the sun and moon. In some places, wildflowers began to sprout spontaneously, adding vibrant spots of color to the landscape. Namaka watched in amazement as her aquatic world was complemented by this explosion of terrestrial life. Her waters now not only reflected the lights in the sky, but also the infinite shades of green that Kokoro had brought into being. In the wettest areas, where fresh water accumulated in swamps and marshes, Corvo created specially adapted plants, tall reeds, sturdy cattails, and delicate aquatic plants that floated on the surface of the calm waters. Each environment had its own signature plant, perfectly adapted to the local conditions. As the plants became established, the first natural cycles began to emerge. Leaves fell and decomposed, further enriching the soil. Seeds were carried by the wind, finding new places to germinate. The earth itself seemed to breathe with this new life. "You've created more than plants," said Namaka, observing the complex systems that were forming. "You've created communities, you've created relationships. You've created a living fabric that connects everything." Raven silently agreed. He could feel the connections forming between the roots in the soil, between the treetops above, between the different species that now shared the space. It was a web of life that was becoming more complex by the moment. In special places, Kokoro created natural sanctuaries of extraordinary beauty, hidden valleys where rare flowers bloomed in cascades of color. Ancient forests where gigantic trees stood like pillars of heaven. Natural gardens where every plant seemed to have been placed with artistic precision. The work continued tirelessly. In the driest regions, Corvo created resistant plants that knew how to conserve water, peculiarly shaped cacti, thorny shrubs, and small succulents that sparkled like jewels in the desert sun. Each adaptation was a new expression of their creativity. In the higher mountains, where the air was thinner and the cold more intense, he established a specially hardy vegetation, small alpine flowers that burst into vibrant color during the brief growing seasons, and low, twisted trees that survived the strongest winds. As the green blanket spread across the world, Kokoro realized that he was creating more than just plants. He was laying the foundations for all life to come. The forests, prairies, and swamps would be the cradle of the future creatures that would inhabit his world. The stage is almost set, he thought, his black wings reflecting the shades of green that now dominated the landscape. Just one last touch to go before we can welcome the next inhabitants of this world. With that thought, Raven set to work on his next challenge, creating plants that could provide sustenance for the creatures to come. Fruit trees began to appear in sheltered valleys, their tops laden with juicy fruit. Nutritious grains grew in the fields, and energy-rich roots established themselves in the fertile soil. Namaka, ever observant, noticed how each new addition to the plant world seemed to follow a larger plan. "You think of those that come after," she commented, her waters nourishing the roots of the plants that reach their depths. "Every seed you plant carries the potential to sustain many lives." The sun and moon continued their eternal dance across the sky, marking the passage of time as the world below transformed into a living, pulsating garden. The stars twinkled above the treetops, their reflections now multiplied in the dewy leaves and night flowers that opened only under their silvery light. Kokoro knew that his work with the plant kingdom was almost complete, but he also felt that something even greater awaited him. The plants had brought color and life to the world, but there was still a lack of movement, a lack of voices, a lack of creatures who could appreciate and inhabit this paradise he had created. With his wings open to the wind, Raven contemplated his next great challenge, to bring into being the beings that would give life and movement to this green world. It would be his most complex and important creation yet, and he couldn't wait to get started. Kokoro flew over his verdant world, admiring the symphony of life he had created. The forests whispered ancient secrets, the prairies danced with the wind, and the waters of Namaka reflected the celestial ballet of the sun, moon, and stars. But Raven felt that his work was not yet complete. The final breath of life was missing, the creatures that would give voice and movement to this majestic scenery. Landing gently on an old branch, Kokoro began to gather his creative energy. This time, her work would be more delicate and complex than ever. Creating living beings would require not only form and substance, but also spirit and purpose. The waters yearn for inhabitants, whispered Namaka, his waves gently lapping the verdant shores. I feel the emptiness in the depths that only life can fill. The raven nodded and, with a graceful movement of its wings, began its work in the waters. First came the fish, small and bright, cutting through the waves and silvery shores. Then larger creatures emerged from the depths, playful dolphins, majestic whales, and a myriad of sea creatures that filled Namaka's oceans with movement and purpose. But Kokoro didn't just stop at the waters. Turning his attention to dry land, he began to populate the forests and grasslands. From the smallest insects to the most imposing mammals, each creature was carefully thought out to occupy its specific place in the great fabric of life. Birds were his most special creations. As he himself had wings, he paid extra attention to his winged cousins. Delicate hummingbirds, majestic eagles, wise owls. Each was given a unique gift, a special way to contribute to the harmony of the world. You create not just bodies, but stories, observed Namaka, watching as each creature integrated perfectly into its surroundings. The butterflies danced among the flowers she had seen Kokoro plant. The deer grazed on the prairies he had sown, and the bears found shelter in the caves he had carved. As the creatures multiplied, they began to establish their own relationships and cycles. Predator and prey, pollinator and flower, each being found its role in the great dance of life. The once silent world now pulsed with roars, chants, hums, and calls. Kokoro flew from one habitat to another, adjusting and refining his creation. In the mountains, agile goats and majestic eagles made the heights their home. In the swamps, frogs and herons created a natural orchestra of sounds. In the grasslands, herds of herbivores grazed peacefully under the watchful eye of predators. Each creature carries a spark of your creative essence, said Namaka, observing how life spread and adapted. I see your wisdom in the way each one finds its place. Raven continued his work, now focusing on the smallest details. He created insects to pollinate flowers and aerate the soil, small rodents to spread seeds, and a myriad of microscopic creatures to maintain the balance of ecosystems. The seasons began to influence animal behavior. Some migrated as the weather changed, others hibernated during colder periods, and still others adapted their appearance and behavior to suit the different times of year. You have created more than life, observed Namaka. You have created stories that will unfold for generations. And so was, each creature had its own role in the world's grand narrative. The songbirds heralded the dawn, the wolves howled at the moon that Kokoro had released, and the whales sang ancient melodies in the depths of Namaka. The raven landed again on the highest peak, observing his creation in all its glory. The world was now a vibrant and dynamic place, where each being lived in harmony with the others and their environment. It is done, he finally said, his words echoing through time. The world is complete. Namaka moved his waters in a pattern of agreement. Yes, it is complete but never finished. What you have created will continue to grow, change, and adapt. Each creature carries within it the potential for evolution and transformation. And so, Kokoro, the raven creator, completed his great work. The world that had once been just darkness and water now pulsed with life in all its forms. The celestial lights he had unleashed illuminated a planet rich in diversity and beauty. But even though he had completed his task, Raven knew that his role was not over. Now he would be the guardian, the observer, the one who would watch over the delicate balance he had established. The stars continued their eternal dance in the sky. The sun and moon kept up their perpetual dance, and the waters of Namaka embraced the earth with their ancient wisdom. And in the midst of all this, Kokoro flew, his black wings reflecting the light that he himself had brought to the world, eternal guardian of the creation that had been born from his power and his imagination. The world was complete, but its story had only just begun. Every sunrise would bring new adventures, every moonset would hold new mysteries, and every shining star would bear witness to the infinite stories that were yet to come in the world Raven had created. The icy October wind blew through the faded tarps of the Shooting Star Circus, making them snap like the sails of a ghost ship. It was 1931, and the Great Depression had turned America into a graveyard of dreams. Between the shadows of the empty stands, Thomas Murphy was adjusting his makeup in front of a cracked mirror, his trembling fingers sliding red lipstick over lips that no longer knew how to smile naturally. The makeshift dressing room was a small wagon decorated with yellowed photographs of better times. In each one, Thomas smiled genuinely, surrounded by crowds who still had reason to laugh. Now, at 45, his wrinkles were deepening under the white paint, like furrows dug by time and sadness. "Are you still performing tonight, Tom?" asked Sarah, the young trapeze artist, leaning against the carriage door. Her green eyes carried the same concern that everyone in the circus shared. Thomas was more than a clown. He was the beating heart of the Shooting Star. Even if that heart was getting weaker and weaker. "The show can't stop, darling," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "People need a few laughs more than ever." His gaze met hers through the mirror, and for a moment, Sarah saw beyond the mask. She saw the man who carried the weight of making others smile while his own soul shattered. The Shooting Star Circus had once been one of the biggest in the American Midwest. Now, it was just another traveling attraction struggling to survive. The grandstands, once packed, could barely hold a few dozen spectators. People had bigger problems than spending their last dime on entertainment. Frank Miller, the circus owner, a burly man with a poorly trimmed mustache, entered the wagon without knocking. "Murphy, we need to talk about the numbers," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of financial worries. "We can't go on like this." Thomas continued applying his makeup as if he hadn't heard. He knew that conversation well. It was the same one that had destroyed so many other circuses in recent years. "Frank, do you remember what you told me when you hired me? A clown isn't just a performer, he's a doctor of the soul." Frank sighed, running his hand over his tired face. "That was 20 years ago, Tom. The world was different. People were different." "This sadness is the same," replied Thomas, standing up. His colorful suit contrasted with the gloomy atmosphere of the wagon, perhaps even greater now. "That's why we need to keep going." Sarah watched the scene in silence, her hands clenching nervously at the hem of her tracksuit bottoms. She had grown up in the circus, and Thomas was like a father to her. Watching him struggle to keep alive not only the spectacle, but the very essence of what it meant to bring joy, broke her heart. Outside, the small town of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, stretched out like a mosaic of hopelessness. Rows of unemployed people snaked through the streets, and for sale signs decorated the facades of once thriving stores. It was against this backdrop that Thomas Murphy had made a silent promise to keep making people laugh, no matter what the cost. "I have an idea," said Thomas, his eyes shining with an intensity Sarah hadn't seen for months. "What if we gave free performances to the children at the orphanage? Think about it, Frank. We might not make any money, but we'll make something more valuable. Hearts." Frank shook his head, but there was a trace of a smile on his lips. "You've always been an idealist, Murphy. That's why I haven't sent you away yet." Night was beginning to fall, and the first stars were appearing in the Iowa sky. Thomas approached the mirror one last time, adjusting his red nose. In the reflection, for a brief moment, he swore he saw something different, a younger version of himself, smiling with a joy he had long since lost. "You know," he said, turning to Sarah and Frank, "they say a clown never really dies. We keep making people laugh even after we're gone." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "Don't talk like that, Tom. You still have a lot of shows ahead of you." Thomas smiled, but there was something different in his gaze. A mixture of determination and melancholy that seemed to transcend the present moment. "Of course, darling. And I promise that as long as there's a single mirror in this world, I'll keep bringing smiles." The circus canvas snapped again in the wind, and the lights began to come on one by one. In a few minutes, albeit to a small audience, Thomas laughed Murphy would be on stage once again. Little did he know that this promise, made in a moment of emotion, would echo through the decades in a way that no one could have predicted. The distant sound of children laughing reached the wagon, and Thomas felt his heart warm. Maybe Frank was right. The world had changed, but as long as there were people who needed a smile, there would be room for a clown who took his mission as seriously as his own life. "It's time," he announced, adjusting his colorful hat. "Let's make these people forget their troubles, if only for a few minutes." As Thomas walked towards the arena, Sarah couldn't help but notice how his shadow seemed to dance on the walls of the wagon, as if it had a life of its own. It was only the beginning of a story that would mix laughter and mystery, joy and melancholy, in a dance that would continue far beyond that night in October 1931. The night wore on as Thomas made his way to the arena, his footsteps echoing through the dimly lit passageway. The familiar smell of sawdust and candies mingled with the cold October air. His thoughts wandered between memories of the golden days of the circus and the harsh reality they now faced. As Thomas approached the curtain that separated the backstage area from the arena, he heard the few voices that made up the audience that night. Among them, he distinguished the crystal-clear sound of children's laughter, the children from the local orphanage who had received free tickets. Their little faces lit up with anticipation were all the fuel he needed. Sarah watched from afar, her heart squeezing as she saw Thomas adjust his posture, like a soldier preparing for battle. This was how he viewed each performance, a sacred mission to bring light to the darkness that had settled in people's hearts during the Great Depression. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host's voice sounded tired, but still trying to maintain the grandeur of yesteryear. "With you, the legend of the Shooting Star Circus, the man who brings smiles to even the darkest nights." Thomas laughed Murphy. The clown walked through the curtain with his characteristic comic stagger, but something was different that night. His movements, although as precise as ever, seemed to carry an extra weight, a shadow that only the most attentive could notice. The performance began like so many others. The usual antics, the jokes he had told hundreds of times, the tricks that made the children squeal with delight. But there was a different intensity to his performance, as if every gesture, every expression, was a declaration of love for his art. Between acts, Thomas noticed a little girl in the front row. Her large, attentive eyes followed him with a mixture of fascination and sadness that he recognized immediately. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning. During a pause, he approached her, pulling a colorful scarf seemingly out of nowhere. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, his voice gentle behind the painted smile. "Lucy," she answered shyly, "from St. Vincent's Orphanage." Thomas turned the handkerchief into a paper flower, his nimble fingers dancing in the air. "You know, Lucy, sometimes life can seem a bit sad," he said, handing her the flower, "but there's always magic hidden in the most unlikely places." The girl held the flower as if it were a precious treasure, and her smile lit up the whole arena. At that moment, Thomas felt a pang in his chest, a painful reminder of his own mortality that had become more frequent in recent months. Frank watched from the backstage entrance, his financial worries momentarily forgotten in the face of the magic he was witnessing. He knew Thomas wasn't well. The doctors had been clear about his heart condition, but seeing him there, turning sadness into joy, was a reminder of why the Shooting Star Circus was still going. The show went on, and Thomas seemed to get better by the minute. His jokes were sharper, his movements more graceful, as if he were channeling a lifetime of experience into a single evening. The audience's laughter echoed through the tent, louder and more genuine than it had been in months. Sarah noticed that the shadows cast by Thomas on the tent walls seemed to have a life of their own, dancing in an almost supernatural way. It was as if multiple versions of him were performing simultaneously, each carrying a different facet of his personality. Towards the end of the show, Thomas prepared for his favorite act, the mirror trick. With a theatrical gesture, he revealed a full-length mirror in the center of the arena. The object, an old circus relic, looked mysterious under the colored lights. "You see," he announced to the audience, "sometimes it's not what's in front of the mirror that matters, but what it reflects in our hearts." As he stood in front of the mirror, something strange happened. For a brief moment, his reflection seemed to move independently, as if it were a separate entity. Some children gasped, but most interpreted it as part of the show. Lucy, still holding her paper flower, leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide with fascination. She was the only one who noticed when Thomas gently touched the mirror and whispered something that sounded like a promise. The end of the performance was met with enthusiastic applause. Not many people, but their affection was genuine. Thomas took his final bow, his smile brighter than ever, even if his legs trembled slightly under the weight of the effort. Backstage, Sarah rushed over to help him. "Tom, you looked amazing today," she said, noticing how he leaned heavily on her shoulder. "Just doing my job, darling," he replied, his breathing a little wheezy. "Just reminding people that there's still magic in the world." Frank approached, carrying an envelope. "Murphy, about that idea of free performances. Maybe we could try it. You tried something today?" Thomas smiled, but his eyes were fixed on the mirror that was still in the arena, reflecting the lights that were beginning to fade. For a moment, everyone present swore they saw something strange in the reflection, as if multiple smiles were hovering on the silver surface. "You know," said Thomas, his voice carrying a different tone, "they say that every great artist leaves a bit of their soul in every performance. Maybe that's true in more ways than we realize." The night was beginning to say goodbye, and with it, something in the air seemed to change. The shadows on the circus walls danced with a life of their own, and the mirrors in the dressing room caught reflections that shouldn't have been there. It was as if Thomas's promise to keep bringing smiles was already beginning to take shape in ways that no one could have predicted. That same evening, after the show, Thomas remained at the circus long after everyone had left. Sitting in his dressing room, he gazed at his reflection in the cracked mirror, slowly removing the makeup that had become his second skin over the years. "It's funny," he muttered to himself, "how a painted face can hide so many truths." His fingers trembled more than usual as he wiped away the last trace of white paint. The mirror now revealed not only his tired face, but also shadows that seemed to move on their own in the corners of the reflection. Sarah had insisted on staying with him, worried about his condition after the extraordinary performance, but Thomas had kindly refused her company. "Some conversations," he said with an enigmatic smile, "we need to have only with our own reflection." The autumn wind continued its melancholy dance around the circus, making the tarpaulins moan like ancient beached whales. Thomas picked up a worn photo album that he kept in a drawer, his private collection of memories of the shooting star. Each page told a different story. Each image captured a moment of joy that now seemed to belong to another life. As he leafed through the album, one photograph in particular caught his eye. It was from his first circus performance 20 years ago. Young Thomas was smiling genuinely at the camera, his eyes shining with hope and determination. But there was something strange about the image. In the shadows behind him, there seemed to be another smile, one that he was sure hadn't been there when the picture was taken. "Curious," he whispered, bringing the photograph closer to his face. The smile in the shadows seemed to wink at him, like a distant star in the night sky. A sudden noise made him look up. In the dressing room mirror, his reflection didn't follow the movement. For a moment that seemed to span eternity, Thomas observed his own image smiling back at him, regardless of his expressions. "So that's how it's going to be?" he asked his reflection, his voice calm despite the extraordinary nature of the situation. The Thomas in the mirror only widened his smile, his eyes carrying all the joy that the real Thomas had lost over the years. Outside the carriage, little Lucy, who had hidden after the show, watched in fascination through a crack in the window. She watched as Thomas stood up and touched the mirror with his fingertips, and as his reflection made the same gesture, but with an almost imperceptible delay, I always knew there was something magical about you, Mr. Murphy, she whispered to herself, clutching the paper flower he had given her against her chest. Thomas felt a presence and turned to the window, but Lucy had already disappeared into the darkness. What remained was a strange feeling that something fundamental had changed that night, as if the real world and the world of reflections had begun to mix in unpredictable ways. Picking up his old makeup case, Thomas began to organize his belongings with special care. Each item had its own story. The red nose his mentor had given him, the broken comb he'd been using for decades, the magic handkerchief that always kept tricks up its sleeve. You know, he said to his reflection in the mirror, who was now watching him with an expression of understanding. I always wondered if it was me who made people laugh, or if it was something bigger through me. The reflection tilted its head slightly, as if considering the question. The shadows in the carriage seemed to pulsate with a life of their own, dancing on the walls like silent spectators of a singular conversation. Thomas felt that twinge in his chest again, stronger this time. His heart, that old companion of so many performances, seemed to want to tell him something. He sat down heavily in his chair, taking a deep breath as drops of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Not yet, he muttered, as much to himself as to his reflection. I still have promises to keep. In the photo album open on the table, the pictures seemed to take on a new dimension. In each of them, in the shadows and in the less noticeable corners, mysterious smiles began to appear, as if the past was being rewritten before his eyes. The wind outside increased in intensity, and with it came the distant sound of laughter. Not the laughter of the present, but echoes of all the joys Thomas had provided throughout his career. It was as if the circus itself was alive, breathing memories and exuding magic. Sarah, who had decided to go back to check on her friend one last time, stopped at the wagon door when she heard Thomas talking. But when she looked out of the window, she saw only him sitting alone, smiling at his own reflection, as if sharing an intimate secret with a younger, happier version of himself. "Tom," she called softly, knocking on the door. "Is everything all right?" "Never better, darling," he replied, without looking away from the mirror. "Just finding out that some shows never really end." Thomas's words carried a weight that Sarah couldn't fully comprehend, but which made her heart clench with a mixture of love and concern. She knew, somehow instinctively, that she was witnessing the beginning of something both wonderful and melancholy. Dawn crept in as Sarah stood at the entrance to the carriage, watching Thomas through the crack in the door. Something in the atmosphere had changed. The air seemed denser, charged with an invisible electricity that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Sarah, darling," Thomas's voice sounded different, as if it had come from a long way away. "Do you remember the first time you saw me perform?" She entered the carriage, taking a seat next to him. "Of course I do. I was only 6 years old. You made a balloon elephant that looked real. I swore I was going to start walking any minute." Thomas smiled, his eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the mirror. "The magic isn't in the tricks, you know. It's in the eyes of the beholder, in the will to believe that there is something extraordinary in the world." The wind outside had turned into a peculiar symphony, mixing the creaks of the canvas with whispers that seemed to carry distant laughter. The photographs scattered on the table seemed to pulsate with a life of their own, each image telling its own silent story. Lucy, who had sneaked back into the circus, watched everything from the wagon window. Her childlike eyes, not yet limited by the bonds of adult disbelief, caught details that others couldn't see, like the shadows that danced independently of the light, or the smiles that appeared and disappeared in the reflections. "Tom," Sarah held her old friend's hand, noticing how cold it was. "Maybe we should call a doctor." "There's no need," he replied, his voice surprisingly firm. "Tonight is not about endings, but about new beginnings." Frank appeared at the wagon door, his normally stern face marked by genuine concern. "Murphy, we found this in the old circus archives," he said, handing Thomas a yellowed envelope. Inside the envelope was a photograph even older than the others. It showed the Shooting Star Circus in its early days, decades before Thomas joined the troupe. But there, in the shadows of the tent, was a familiar smile, a face that looked impossibly similar to his own. "Extraordinary, isn't it?" Thomas laughed softly. It feels like I've always been here, in one form or another. Sarah and Frank exchanged worried glances, but before they could say anything, a sound of childish laughter filled the air. Lucy had finally plucked up the courage to enter the carriage, still clutching her paper flower. "Mr. Murphy," she said, her voice small but determined, "are you really going to keep making people smile forever?" Thomas knelt in front of her, his movements slow but graceful. "You know, Lucy, there are different ways of being present. Sometimes we're in the smiles we leave behind, in the memories we plant in people's hearts." The wagon lights flickered on, and for a moment everyone swore they saw multiple reflections of Thomas in the mirrors, each from a different era, each carrying a unique smile. It was as if time had folded in on itself, allowing different versions of him to coexist in the same space. "Frank," Thomas turned to the circus owner, "promise you'll keep the shooting star alive, not for the profits, but for what it represents, a place where magic is still possible." Frank, normally so pragmatic, felt tears forming in his eyes. "You have my word, Murphy. This place will always be a sanctuary for dreamers." Sarah realized that something fundamental was changing. The shadows in the carriage had begun to move more pronouncedly, as if responding to a song that only they could hear. Thomas's reflection in the main mirror was smiling with a vivacity that contrasted with his increasingly serene expression. "Lucy," Thomas called out to the girl again. "You can see it, can't you? The smiles in the shadows, the stories in the photographs." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. "They've always been there, haven't they? Waiting to continue the show." Thomas smiled, a smile as genuine as those in his older photographs. "Exactly. And now, my dear, I must prepare for my next performance." He stood up, walking over to the main mirror. His reflection awaited him, no longer as a simple image, but as a doorway to something beyond ordinary comprehension. The photographs scattered around the wagon seemed to vibrate with an energy of their own, each smile captured on paper beginning to come to life. Sarah wanted to stop him, to grab his arm and keep him there, but something in her heart knew that this moment was inevitable and perhaps necessary. Frank remained silent, witness to a transformation that defied all logic. "A clown never really dies," said Thomas, his voice mixing with the wind that blew through the circus. "He just finds new stages, new ways to bring joy." When he touched the surface of the mirror, it wasn't his reflection he found, but a portal to all the laughter that was yet to come, all the joy that still needed to be shared. Lucy smiled, being the only one who truly understood what was happening. The magic wasn't ending. It was just beginning a new phase. The wind blew stronger, bringing with it the echo of all the past and future performances of the Shooting Star Circus. And on that extraordinary night, while the world outside continued its struggle against the Great Depression, something wonderful and inexplicable happened in a small circus wagon in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. A clown was fulfilling his last and most important promise. The next morning, the news spread quickly through the small town of Cedar Rapids. Thomas laughed. Murphy had left during the night, but the circumstances of his departure generated more whispers and speculation than sadness. The wagon where he had spent his last hours was exactly as it had been left. Old photographs scattered on the table, his clown costume carefully folded on the chair, and the main mirror reflecting the dawn light in a peculiarly vivid way. Sarah was the first to enter the carriage that morning, her eyes still red from a bad night's sleep. The air inside the small space felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. The photographs on the table had changed subtly. In each one, Thomas's smile seemed more alive, more present. "He's really done it, hasn't he?" Lucy appeared in the doorway, still holding her paper flower, now a little crumpled but still magical. "He's found a way to keep making people smile." Frank arrived soon after, carrying the morning papers. The headlines talked about the economic crisis, about banks closing and families losing everything, but on the inside pages, a small note caught the eye. Circo Estrella announces free performances for underprivileged children. "That's what he wanted," said Frank, his voice hoarse with emotion. "To keep the magic alive, especially for those who need it most." The days that followed brought subtle changes to the Shooting Star Circus. People began to notice strange things, reflections that seemed to move on their own, laughter that echoed when no one was around, and above all, the mysterious smiles that appeared in old and new photographs. Sarah took on the responsibility of organizing Thomas's belongings, but every time she tried to put his things away, something inexplicable happened. The photographs returned to the table, as if they wanted to continue telling their stories. The main mirror refused to be covered. Any cloth placed over it would mysteriously fall off during the night. Lucy began to spend more time at the circus, especially in the old wagon. She talked to the reflections as if they were old friends, and sometimes the other performers swore you could hear answers in the laughter the wind brought. "Look," she exclaimed one afternoon, pointing to a new photograph of the circus. In the image, taken during a recent performance, Thomas's characteristic smile could be clearly seen in the shadows of the stairs. News of this extraordinary occurrence spread, first as a whisper among the performers, then as an urban legend throughout the city. People started coming to the circus, not just for the shows, but in the hope of capturing in their own photographs a glimpse of the legendary clown who had promised never to stop making people smile. The most remarkable thing was how Thomas's presence seemed strongest during the moments of greatest joy. When the children laughed, the mirrors in the circus reflected multiple smiles. When someone took a photograph of a particularly happy moment, it was almost certain that a familiar smile would appear in the shadows of the image. Frank, initially skeptical, began to notice changes in himself. The financial worries, although still present, seemed less burdensome. He found himself smiling more often, especially when he passed Thomas's carriage, where the main mirror continued to reflect much more than just images. "It's as if he's found a way to turn all the sadness into something beautiful," Sarah commented one evening, observing how the circus lights danced differently, creating patterns that resembled smiles on the tent walls. The Great Depression continued outside, but inside the Shooting Star Circus, something magical was happening. Free performances for underprivileged children had become a tradition, and with them, stories about a clown who appeared in reflections, bringing smiles at the most unlikely moments. Lucy, who had become a sort of unofficial guardian of Thomas's legacy, began collecting stories from people who swore they had seen him. Each account was different, but they all shared a common element: the feeling that, even in the darkest moments, there was room for a smile. "He taught us that the real magic is in how we choose to see the world," she said one day, organizing her growing collection of mysterious photographs. "Sometimes you have to look through the reflections to find the truth." The Shooting Star Circus didn't just survive the Great Depression. It flourished, becoming a beacon of hope in difficult times. People came not just for the entertainment, but for the chance to experience something truly magical. And so the story of Thomas Laugh Murphy continued, not as a sad legend, but as a constant reminder that joy can find its way through the most unlikely of circumstances. His smile, multiplied infinitely through reflections and photographs, became a symbol of resistance against the darkness of the times. On the quietest nights, when the wind blew through the circus tarpaulins, you could still hear the echo of his laughter, mixed with the thousands of others he had inspired over the years. His last act had not been an end, but a beginning, the start of a new form of magic that would continue to touch hearts and inspire smiles for generations. And in every mirror, in every photograph old or new, in every moment of genuine joy, Thomas Laugh Murphy continued to fulfill his promise, proving that some stories never really end. They just find new ways to be told, new hearts to touch, and new smiles to inspire. In the vastness of the imperial sky, where golden clouds danced to the eternal winds and jade palaces floated like crystallized dreams, lived Jinyu, the celestial weaver. Her deft fingers wove the most beautiful brocades in the cosmos, creating the colors of dawn and dusk that adorned the mortal world below. As the daughter of the mighty celestial emperor, her life was governed by duties and traditions as old as the stars themselves. Every morning, Jinyu sat at her magic loom, near the banks of the celestial river, her delicate hands moving with supernatural grace as she transformed threads of light into fabrics worthy of the gods. Her long black hair cascaded like silk over her shoulders, and her eyes, as deep as the starry night, often wandered beyond the celestial horizon, dreaming of something that even she could not define. The celestial emperor, her father, ruled the divine realm with absolute authority. His word was law for immortals and mortals alike, and his temper was as unpredictable as the storms he sometimes sent to earth. Although he loved his daughter deeply, his preoccupation with the celestial order and traditions often overrode any paternal feelings. Far below the celestial palace, on the green plains of the mortal world, lived Niolong the cattleman. His simple life consisted of tending his flock, watching the stars, and dreaming of something greater than his earthly existence. Orphaned at a young age, his only companion was an old and magical ox who, unknown to many, was actually an ancient immortal who had chosen to live among mortals. The ox, who answered to the name of the wise old man, had eyes that shone with ancient knowledge and a gentle voice that only Niolong could hear. There are more mysteries between heaven and earth than mortals realize, the wise old man used to say, watching his young friend gaze at the stars on clear nights. It was during one of these nights that fate began to weave its own patterns. Jinnu, tired of the monotony of her celestial existence, decided to do something she had never dared before. She knew of a secret passage, a small portal between the realms that her long-dead mother had shown her. Sometimes, his mother had said, you have to lose yourself to find yourself. With his heart beating hard against his immortal chest, Jinnu stepped through the portal, descending into the mortal world on a full moon night. The air was different down there, denser, richer in scents than he had ever experienced. The grass beneath his bare feet had a unique texture, and the wind that caressed his face seemed to sing completely new melodies. That same night, Niolong was herding his flock near a crystal-clear lake, where the stars were reflected like liquid jewels. The wise old man, more restless than usual, had insisted that they take the animals to that particular spot, even though it was further away than their usual pastures. It was then that their eyes met for the first time. Jinnu, enchanted by the sensation of the earthy water on her feet, and Niolong, momentarily paralyzed by the sight of the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. Time seemed to freeze, the stars shone more brightly, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Who are you?" asked Niolong, his voice little more than a whisper, fearful of breaking the magic of the moment. Jinnu, who had never felt his heart beat like that, answered truthfully, "I'm just someone looking for something different." The old sage watched from a distance, his ancient eyes shining with a mixture of joy and concern. He knew better than anyone that love between immortals and mortals had been forbidden since the beginning of time. But he also knew that some feelings are stronger than any law, be it divine or earthly. In the days that followed, Jinnu continued to descend into the mortal world, meeting Niolong secretly by the lake. Each meeting was a new discovery. He taught her about wildflowers and birdsong, while she told him about the constellations and the secrets of the stars. The love between them grew like a rare flower, nurtured by the purity of their hearts and the strength of their feelings. But with every encounter, every smile exchanged, and every gentle touch, danger also grew. In the heavenly palace, Jinnu's occasional absence began to be noticed, and whispers began to spread among the immortals. The celestial emperor, ever vigilant, noticed subtle changes in his daughter. Her work on the loom, once perfect, occasionally showed small imperfections, as if her thoughts were far away. Her eyes, once contemplative, now shone with a different light, a joy he didn't understand. And so, as love blossomed on earth, dark clouds began to form in the sky. The wise old man, in his nightly conversations with Niolong, tried to prepare him for the inevitable. True love, my young friend, often requires greater sacrifices than we can imagine. But for the young lovers, absorbed in their newfound happiness, danger seemed as distant and hazy as stars on a clear morning. They lived each moment as if it were eternal, unaware that their days of happiness were numbered and that they would soon face a storm that would change not only their lives, but the starry sky itself. The encounters between Jinyu and Niulong continued, becoming more frequent and deeper. The wise old man, observing the love growing between them, decided it was time to reveal his true purpose. One particularly starry night, he called Niulong in for a chat. "My young friend," said the magical ox, his voice laden with ancient wisdom, "there is something I need to tell you about your beloved. Jinyu is no mere mortal. She is the celestial weaver, daughter of the Emperor of Heaven himself." Niulong felt her heart skip a beat. Suddenly, many things made sense. Jinyu's supernatural grace, her knowledge of the stars, the eternal sparkle in her eyes. But instead of fear or hesitation, his love only grew stronger. "What should I do?" he asked the wise old man. "True love knows no barriers," replied the ox. "If your heart is pure and your intention is true, there is a way. I can help you, but you must be prepared for the consequences." That same evening, when Jinyu came downstairs for their usual meeting, Niulong gently confronted her with the truth she had just discovered. To her surprise, tears of relief streamed down her face. "I wanted to tell you," she said, "but I was afraid that knowing my true nature would change your feelings." "Nothing could change how I feel about you," Niulong replied, taking her hands in his. The wise old man then revealed his plan. Using his ancient magic, he could create a temporary path to the heavenly realm, allowing Niulong to ascend to the heavens. There, they could marry in secret, uniting their destinies before any interference could separate them. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. Under the glow of 1,000 stars, Jinyu and Niulong exchanged vows of eternal love. The wise old man, serving as witness and officiant, blessed their union with ancient and powerful words. For a while, they managed to keep their marriage a secret. Jinyu continued his duties at the celestial loam, but now his creations were even more beautiful, inspired by the love that filled his heart. Niulong, with the help of the old sage's magic, could visit her in her heavenly chambers when the shadows were deepest. But secrets have a peculiar way of revealing themselves, especially in the realm of the immortals. One morning, one of the heavenly servants noticed a thread of golden straw attached to Jinyu's robes, a reminder of the nights spent in the earthly fields with Niulong. The whispers began to spread through the heavenly palace like a breeze through the clouds. Soon, rumors reached the celestial emperor's ears about his daughter, an immortal. His fury was immediate and terrible. The sky darkened with storm clouds, and lightning cut through the firmament. The emperor summoned Jinyu into his presence, his eyes blazing with divine power and restrained rage. "Is it true," he thundered, "have you, my daughter, heir to the heavenly loom, defiled yourself with the love of a mortal?" Jinyu, though trembling, stood firm. Years of love had given her a strength that not even she knew she possessed. "Yes, father, and I have no regrets. The love we share is pure and true." The emperor's fury exploded like a supernova. With a wave of his hand, he summoned his heavenly guards. "Bring me this mortal who dared to seduce my daughter." Niulong, who was on earth tending his flock, sensed the change in the air. The wise old man, sensing the imminent danger, quickly warned him. "They are coming. You must run." But Niulong refused. "I can't abandon her. If I must face heaven's fury, so be it." The heavenly guards descended like comets, their golden armor gleaming under the turbulent sun. Niulong was taken by force to the heavenly palace, where the emperor awaited him on his throne of jade and starlight. The trial was swift and ruthless. The emperor, blinded by rage and wounded pride, pronounced his sentence. "You have dared to defy heavenly laws. Love between mortals and immortals has been forbidden since the beginning of time. As punishment, you will be separated forever." With a flick of his golden scepter, the emperor created a vast river of stars between the lovers. The Milky Way, an impassable barrier of light and cosmic energy. Jinyu was imprisoned on one side, condemned to weave eternally, while Niulong was banished to the other side, transformed into a lonely star. The wise old man, watching all this from Earth, felt his ancient heart breaking. He knew that true love could not be completely destroyed, not even by the decree of a god. In his last moments before disappearing, he left a final gift. His words of power spread across the universe, touching the hearts of all the whores in the world. The lovers' separation was felt in all the kingdoms. On Earth, the flowers wilted with sadness, and in the sky, the stars lost some of their brilliance. Jinyu wept as she wove, her tears turning to rain in the mortal world, and Yolong, now a distant star, shone with a melancholy light that spoke of love and loss. But even in the deepest darkness, a glimmer of hope persisted. Their love had touched the hearts of many, and although separated by a river of stars, their hearts remained united by bonds stronger than any divine decree. It was then that something extraordinary began to happen. The magpies, those black and white feathered birds, began to gather in ever greater numbers. Moved by the ancient magic of the old sage and touched by the depth of love between Jinyu and Yolong, they began to form a pattern in the sky. On the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, when a lover's sadness seemed deeper than the cosmos itself, the magpies took flight towards the heavenly river. Thousands of them, their wings shining under the starlight, began to position themselves side by side, forming a bridge over the Milky Way. The celestial emperor, observing this phenomenon from his throne, felt his resolve waver for the first time. The show of compassion from the simple terrestrial birds made him question the harshness of his own sentence. In his heart, a seed of regret began to sprout. Jinyu, on his side of the starry river, saw the magpies approaching and felt his heart speed up. On the other side, Yolong, whose starry form still held the consciousness of his love, shone with renewed hope. The bridge of feathers and dedication was almost complete. The other heavenly deities, moved by the demonstration of true love and the compassionate intervention of the magpies, began to intercede with the emperor. The Queen Mother of the West, one of the oldest and most respected deities, approached the celestial throne. "Great Emperor," she spoke in her melodious voice, "observe how even the simplest creatures recognize the purity of this love. Perhaps we can find a middle ground between justice and compassion." The emperor, on his jade throne, gazed longingly at the spectacle before his eyes. The magpies, tireless in their mission, continued to form the bridge, their wings touching in perfect harmony. It was then that he pronounced his new sentence. "Let these lovers be allowed to meet once a year on this very day when the magpies form their bridge. This will be an eternal reminder of the power of true love and the consequences of defying heavenly laws." The news spread quickly throughout the kingdoms. On Earth, mortals began to observe this day with special reverence, marking the beginning of what would come to be known as the Qixi Festival. In heaven, the other deities celebrated this small victory of love over the rigidity of traditions. Jinyu and Yolong, even though they knew their meetings would be brief and spaced out, felt a new hope blossom. The certainty that they could see each other again, even if only once a year, brought a new glow to their existence. The magpies, proud of their role in this love story, took on their mission with sacred dedication. Every year, on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, they come together to form the bridge that allows the heavenly lovers to meet again. This story has been told from generation to generation, inspiring countless poets, artists, and lovers over the centuries. The Qixi Festival has become a celebration not only of the love between Jinyu and Yolong, but of all loves that face obstacles and persevere. On clear moonlit nights, when the stars shine especially brightly, it is said that Jinyu and Yolong can be seen on opposite sides of the Milky Way, their love eternalized in the firmament. Their stories intertwine with the constellations, reminding everyone who looks up at the sky that true love can overcome even the most impossible barriers. The wise old man, although no longer present in physical form, lives on through the magic he bestowed on the magpies and in the wisdom his words still carry. True love knows no bounds, whether in heaven or on earth. Mortals began to develop their own traditions around this story. Young women began to make offerings to Jinnu, asking for skill in crafts and luck in love. Couples in love choose this day to make promises of eternal love, inspired by the unwavering devotion of the heavenly lovers. Each annual meeting of Jinnu and Niulong has become a cosmic celebration. The stars seem to shine brighter, the flowers bloom more vigorously, and even the wind seems to carry melodies of love in its currents. The story of their forbidden love and the compassion of the magpies has spread beyond China's borders, touching hearts in distant lands. In each place where the story is told, it takes on new meanings and interpretations, but its essence remains the same, the transformative power of true love. And so, every year, as the 7th lunar month approaches, eyes turn to the sky in anticipation. The magpies prepare for their sacred mission, and eternal lovers await their brief moment of reunion. An eternal reminder that not even the strictest laws of heaven can prevent two hearts truly in love from finding their way to each other. The celebration of the Qixi festival has grown over the centuries to become one of the most eagerly awaited events in both the heavenly realm and the mortal world. As the magpies continued their annual sacred mission, something unexpected began to happen in the fabric of the universe itself. During one of Jinnu and Niulong's annual meetings, a small crack appeared in the barrier separating the heavenly realm from the mortal world. It was almost imperceptible at first, but with each meeting of the lovers, it grew subtly, fueled by the strength of their immortal love. The celestial emperor, ever vigilant, noticed this change in the cosmic balance. He consulted the ancient oracles and discovered a disturbing truth. The love between his daughter and the mortal had become so powerful that it was altering the very laws that govern the kingdoms. In the depths of the heavenly palace, the emperor convened an extraordinary council with the most ancient deities. The Queen Mother of the West, who had previously interceded for the lovers, was present, along with the jade dragon and other immortal beings of great power. Their love is defying the natural order, declared the emperor, his voice echoing through the jade halls. The barrier between the realms is weakening. If it continues, the balance between heaven and earth could be upset irreparably. The Queen Mother of the West, with her ancient wisdom, observed, "Perhaps it's not their love that threatens the balance, but our resistance to it. The universe always finds a way to harmonize." While the immortals debated on Earth, mortals began to notice subtle changes. The stars seemed to dance differently in the sky, and some people reported glimpses of celestial figures on particularly clear nights. The veil between the worlds was indeed becoming thinner. The spirit of the wise old man, although long since dissolved in the cosmos, manifested its presence through signs and omens. Flowers bloomed out of season, and the magpies began to exhibit unusual behavior, gathering in groups even outside the Qixi festival. On her side of the Milky Way, Jinnu realized that her fabrics began to carry even more powerful mystical properties. When she wove with Niulong in mind, the brocades took on a life of their own, telling stories of eternal love through patterns that moved like living constellations. Niulong, in her starry form, was also experiencing changes. His glow intensified, and he found that he could communicate with the stars around him, which began to move in patterns that reflected his feelings for Jinnu. The jade dragon, after long moments of contemplation, offered a unique perspective. Their love isn't destroying the balance. It's creating a new kind of harmony. Observe how the stars respond to their presence, how nature itself adapts to accommodate their love. This revelation provoked murmurs among the assembled deities. Some began to question whether the ancient laws that separated mortals and immortals were truly immutable, or whether they had arisen from long-forgotten fears and prejudices. In a surprising move, some of the minor deities began to actively intercede for the lovers. They argued that Jinnu and Niulong's love had become a positive force in the universe, inspiring not only mortals but also heavenly beings themselves to contemplate the nature of true love. The magpies, sensing these cosmic changes, began to develop new abilities. Some of them could now fly higher than ever, almost touching the stars, while others developed a soft glow to their feathers, as if they had absorbed some of the heavenly light. The Qixi festival has also evolved. What was once just a day of hope and reunion became a celebration lasting several days, with elaborate rituals both on earth and in heaven. Mortals created new traditions, and their prayers and offerings began to carry a power of their own. A young priestess on earth, particularly sensitive to heavenly energies, began to receive visions of the true meaning behind Jinyu and Yolan's story. She understood that their love was not just a story of forbidden romance, but a symbol of the union between the divine and the earthly, between the eternal and the temporal. Her interpretation spread, finding an echo in the hearts of many. People began to see the Qixi festival not just as a celebration of romantic love, but as a moment to reflect on the deep connections that bind all beings, mortal and immortal. The celestial emperor, observing all these changes, found himself in an ever deeper dilemma. His concern for the cosmic balance remained, but he couldn't ignore the positive transformations that his daughter's love had triggered. In his moments of solitude, he allowed himself to remember the love he had felt for Jinyu's mother so long ago. He remembered how she too had defied convention and how her loss had hardened him, making him cling even more rigidly to the old laws. The changes in the fabric of the universe continued, subtle but undeniable. The rift between the realms was not a threat, as initially feared, but a possibility for transformation. It was as if the cosmos itself was adapting to create a new kind of balance, one that could accommodate the transformative power of true love. One day, while the celestial emperor was contemplating the events of the last few centuries on his jade throne, a revelation struck him like a ray of divine light. The words of the Queen Mother of the West and the jade dragon echoed in his mind, along with the memories of his own lost love. He realized that the time had come for a fundamental change, so he convened a great council, bringing together not only the heavenly deities, but also representatives of the mortal world, including the young priestess whose interpretations had touched so many hearts. It was the first time in history that mortals had been invited to take part in a celestial assembly. For eons, began the emperor, his voice resonating through the realms, we have held the barriers between heaven and earth as something sacred and immutable. But the love of my daughter in Yolan has shown us that perhaps we were mistaken. The universe isn't deteriorating, it's evolving. The priestess, trembling at the magnitude of the moment, found the courage to speak. Great Emperor, in my visions, I see that true love is like water. It always finds a way, no matter the obstacles. Perhaps it's time to flow with it, instead of try to contain it. The deities murmured in agreement, and even the stars seemed to twinkle more brightly. The jade dragon spoke up. The changes we are witnessing are not a threat to the cosmic order, but rather its natural evolution. Jinyu and Yolan's love is teaching us a new form of harmony. It was then that the celestial emperor made an unprecedented decision. With a wave of his golden scepter, he began to reshape the very structure of the cosmos. The Milky Way, which had served as a barrier for so long, began to transform. The stars danced and rearranged themselves, creating new paths and connections between the realms. From now on, declared the emperor, Jinyu and Yolan will be able to meet not just once a year, but whenever the moon is full. What's more, their love will serve as a permanent bridge between our worlds, allowing other true loves to find their way too. The news spread quickly through all the kingdoms. On Earth, flowers bloomed out of season and magpies performed a celestial dance of joy. In the sky, the stars shone with an intensity never seen before, as if celebrating this new era of possibilities. Jinyu and Yolan were summoned to the emperor's presence. When they met again in the heavenly halls, their love radiated a light so pure that even the most ancient deities were moved. The emperor, looking at his daughter, saw not only the celestial weaver, but also the reflection of the love he had once felt. You have changed not only your destinies, he said, but the destiny of all the kingdoms. Your love has shown us that the barriers we create are often just illusions born of fear. As part of this new order, the Emperor granted Yolan immortal status, not as a concession to tradition, but in recognition of the transformative power of her love. The magpies, who had served as a temporary bridge for so long, were honored as eternal guardians of this new connection between the worlds. The Chishi festival was transformed into an even more significant celebration. Now, it was not just a commemoration of the love between Jinnu and Yolan, but a reminder of true love's ability to transcend all barriers, whether heavenly or earthly. The young priestess was appointed as the first of a new order of intermediaries between the realms, charged with preserving and passing on the wisdom of this new harmony. Her visions and interpretations were recorded in sacred texts, which were studied by mortals and immortals alike. The spirit of the wise old man, who had planted the first seeds of this transformation, manifested one last time in a soft glow that enveloped everyone present. His ancient wisdom had found its fullest expression in the union of the realms he had once helped to bring together. The changes in the cosmos continued to unfold in subtle and profound ways. The crack that had once worried the Emperor revealed itself as the first sign of a necessary transformation. Not a rupture, but an opening to new possibilities. Jinnu continued to weave in the sky, but now his fabrics told stories not just of love, but of transformation and renewal. Yolan, although now immortal, retained her connection to the simplicity and beauty of the mortal world, serving as a living bridge between the realms. The story of their love became more than a legend. It became a living symbol of hope and possibility, reminding everyone that true love has the power not only to unite hearts, but to transform the very fabric of the universe. And so, on full moon nights, when the stars shine especially brightly and magpies fly higher than usual, you can see 2 points of light dancing together in the sky. Jinnu and Yolan, eternally united, their hearts beating in harmony with the pulse of the cosmos, reminding all who observe that love, in its purest form, is the most powerful force in all realms. The scorching sun of ancient Babylon beat down on the clay streets of the city of Sippara as Adad-Bani, a young scribe of only 17, walked hurriedly towards the temple of Shamash. His ink-stained fingers firmly gripped a freshly engraved clay tablet, still damp from the morning's work. The young man had been chosen to document one of the most important moments in the kingdom's history, the arrival of the divine laws to King Hammurabi. His leather sandals thudded against the dusty ground as he dodged merchants, running children, and wagons laden with goods. The temple of Shamash rose majestically in front of him, its baked brick walls gleaming in the intense midday light. Adad-Bani knew that his position as the temple's chief scribe was a rare privilege for someone so young, but it also carried an immense responsibility. Inside the temple, the high priest No-Sin, a middle-aged man with piercing eyes and a neatly trimmed gray beard, was waiting anxiously. "Did you bring the records of the last vision?" he asked, his voice echoing through the sacred corridors. Adad-Bani nodded, carefully handing the tablet to the priest. "King Hammurabi had another dream tonight," murmured No-Sin, as his eyes traveled over the cuneiform characters engraved in the clay. Shamash appeared to him again, bringing further instructions on the laws that should govern our people. The young scribe felt a shiver run down his spine. In recent months, the king had reported increasingly frequent visions of the sun god, who was supposedly instructing him on how to create a fair and balanced code of laws. However, something in No-Sin's gaze aroused concern in Adad-Bani. In the midst of his reflections, a commotion began to form in the temple courtyard. A young woman in simple, dusty clothes ran through the gates, pursued by 2 guards. "Please," she cried, "I need justice. My brother was killed, and the murderer remains free." No-Sin gestured for the guards to stop. The woman, who introduced herself as Anana, recounted in sobs how her brother, a small shopkeeper, had been murdered by a nobleman during a dispute over debts. "The authorities do nothing," she explained. "They say that the word of a nobleman is worth more than that of a dozen merchants." Adad Bani watched attentively as Nurse Sin consoled the woman, promising to bring her case to the attention of the king. When she left, the high priest turned to the young scribe with a grave expression. Now, but you see why these laws are so important? The people are crying out for justice. But how do we balance the power of the nobles with the rights of the lowly? That night, while working by the light of an oil lamp in his temple chambers, Adad Bani couldn't get the image of the desperate woman out of his head. On his work table, several clay tablets were waiting to receive the words that would document the creation of the Code of Laws. But something was bothering him. Among the records he kept, there were notes about cases similar to Ananus. Ordinary people seeking justice against the powerful and not finding it. The young scribe began to notice a disturbing pattern in the visions reported by the king. They always seemed to favor the interests of the nobility, even when Hammurabi insisted that the laws would protect the weakest. A sudden noise made him look up from his work. Nurse Sin was standing outside his chambers, watching him with an expression that was impossible to decipher. "You have doubts, don't you?" asked the priest, entering the small room. "I see it in your eyes when you record the king's visions." Adad Bani hesitated, aware of the danger of questioning the king's word, or worse, the divine will. But something in Nurse Sin's tone of voice encouraged him. "The laws, do they really come from Shamash?" he asked in a whisper. The high priest closed the door behind him and sat down next to the young scribe. "What do you think would happen if the people knew that laws were only the creation of men?" His voice was just a whisper. "How can they be respected without divine authority behind them?" That night's conversation would mark the beginning of a journey that would change Adad Bani's life forever. In the days that followed, he continued his documentation work, but now with a new understanding of the complexity behind the creation of laws. He carefully observed the negotiations between priests and nobles, the discussions about punishments and compensation, and above all, the delicate balance between divine justice and earthly power. Inanna's case was not unique. Every day, people from all walks of life came to the temple in search of justice. Adad Bani began to realize that his role as a scribe went beyond simple registration. He was documenting the birth of something revolutionary, a code of laws that, regardless of their divine or human origin, could truly bring order and justice to the kingdom. As the moon rose in the Babylonian sky, the young scribe continued his work, carefully engraving each word on the clay tablets. The weight of responsibility in his hands was immense, but now he understood that he was participating in something greater than himself, greater even than King Hammurabi himself. He was helping to create a legacy that would span the centuries. The next morning, Adad Bani was awoken by the intense noise coming from the temple courtyard. Groups of people were crowding around, excitedly discussing the rumors that King Hammurabi was about to announce new laws. The young scribe straightened his robes and went to his post, where a new pile of clay tablets awaited him. Nurse Sin was already at his usual post, supervising the preparations for the morning rituals. His eyes met Adad Bani's, and a silent understanding passed between them. The previous night's conversation was to remain a secret. The high priest discreetly approached the young scribe. "Today the king will come to the temple," whispered Nurse Sin. "He has had another vision of Shamash, more powerful than the previous ones. We need to be prepared to record every word." Adad Bani nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility even more acutely after his nightly conversation with the priest. As he prepared his writing instruments, the young man watched Inanna return to the temple. This time, she wasn't alone. Other people accompanied her, each with their own story of injustice to tell. A merchant who had his goods unjustly confiscated, a widow whose land was taken by a nobleman, a craftsman beaten for refusing to work without pay. Adad Bani's heart squeezed at the sight of this procession of suffering. His hands worked mechanically, preparing the clay tablets, but his mind was focused on the stories he was hearing. How could these new laws really protect these people? Would the king's divine visions be enough to guarantee justice for all? Hammurabi's arrival at the temple was announced by the sound of trumpets. The king entered accompanied by his personal guard and a group of advisors. His eyes shone with an almost feverish intensity, and his posture emanated an authority that seemed more than earthly. Adad Bani positioned himself strategically, ready to record every word. "Shamash has come to me again," Hammurabi proclaimed, his voice resounding through the temple. "The sun god has shown me how to protect the weak from the strong, how to establish order in our kingdom." The king began to dictate the new laws, and Adad Bani's fingers flew over the clay, engraving each word with precision. As he worked, the young scribe noticed something interesting. Some of the laws that the king proclaimed as divine revelations were surprisingly similar to the complaints he had heard in the temple courtyard. A specific law on the protection of widows and orphans seemed to respond directly to Inanna's case. During a pause in the dictation, Adad Bani noticed No Sin attentively observing the reaction of the people present. The high priest seemed to be assessing the impact of each new law on the different groups: nobles, merchants, craftsmen, and peasants. Their eyes met briefly, and Adad Bani saw in them a mixture of concern and hope. The session continued until late afternoon. As the sun began to set, Hammurabi ended his proclamation with a solemn blessing. The people began to disperse, commenting animatedly on the new laws. Adad Bani remained at his post, organizing the tablets he had filled in during the day. No Sin approached again, this time accompanied by a man Adad Bani didn't know. "This is Marduk Nasir," introduced the priest. "He's one of the king's closest advisors." The advisor examined the tablets with interest, his experienced eyes assessing the accuracy of the records. "You have a rare gift, young scribe," commented Marduk Nasir. "Your writing is clear and precise, but there is something more. You capture not only the words, but also their deeper meaning." Adad Bani thanked him for the compliment, but couldn't help noticing the exchange of glances between the advisor and No Sin. That evening, while copying the day's records on a permanent tablets, Adad Bani reflected on everything he had witnessed. The laws he was helping to document really did seem to seek a balance between the different strata of society. But how much of this justice really came from divine visions, and how much was the result of human wisdom and political necessity? A movement at the entrance to his chambers caught his attention. It was Inanna, accompanied by Nur Sin. "The king has ordered that your case be reviewed," announced the priest. "The new laws establish clear punishments for crimes like the one that killed your brother, regardless of the criminal's social position." Inanna's face lit up with hope, and Adad Bani felt something change inside him. Perhaps it didn't matter so much whether the laws came directly from Shamash or were the result of human wisdom and need. What mattered was their power to bring justice and order, to protect the weak and regulate the actions of the powerful. As night fell over Babylon, the young scribe continued his work, engraving on the tablets not only the words of the laws, but also the stories of the people they would affect. In his heart, he began to understand that he was taking part in something truly revolutionary, the creation of a code that would forever transform the way societies understood and applied justice. As the days passed, news of the trial of Inanna's case spread quickly through the city. Adad Bani watched as people commented on the new laws and their implications, especially the fact that even nobles could be punished for their crimes. The young scribe continued his meticulous work in the temple, but now with a closer eye on the changes that were beginning to take place in Babylonian society. One morning, while organizing the latest tablets, Marduk Nasir appeared in the temple again, this time with a worried expression. "The king wants you to record something special," he said to Adad Bani. "There has been resistance from some nobles to the new laws." Hammurabi had another vision of Shamash, one that reinforces the divine authority of the code. While preparing the materials for the new registration session, Adad Bani noticed an unusual commotion in the temple corridors. Groups of priests were talking in whispers, and extra guards were stationed at the entrances. No Sin approached him with hurried steps. "Be careful today," muttered the high priest. "There's a lot at stake. Some powerful families are questioning not only the laws, but the very authority of the king to establish them." The young scribe nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. The king arrived at the temple accompanied by a larger than usual escort. His face showed signs of fatigue, but his eyes maintained that intense glow that Adad Bani already knew well. Before the dictation of the new revelations began, Hammurabi summoned Inanna to stand before everyone. "Let everyone see how Shamash guides our justice," proclaimed the king. The nobleman who murdered your brother has been tried and found guilty. His punishment will be the same as that meted out to any other murderer, regardless of his social position." A murmur went through the crowd. While recording the king's words, Ad-Bani noticed suspicious movements among some of the nobles present. They exchanged meaningful glances and whispers that didn't sound like approval. The young scribe noticed that Marduk-Nasir was attentively observing these reactions, making discreet signals to the guards. As the day progressed, Hammurabi continued to dictate new laws and interpretations, increasingly specific about how they should be applied. Ad-Bani worked tirelessly, his skillful hands transforming the king's words into permanent records in clay. During a pause, Nosin approached the young scribe again. "Do you realize what's happening?" he whispered. "The king is using divine authority to consolidate the laws, but he is also responding to the real needs of the people. It's a delicate balance." In the afternoon, an incident disrupted the session. An elderly nobleman, known for his influence in the city, stood up abruptly. "How can we be sure that these are really the words of Shamash?" he wondered aloud. "Why would the sun god choose to protect merchants and craftsmen above those who have always ruled?" The silence that followed was tense. Hammurabi rose slowly from his seat, his figure casting a long shadow on the temple floor. "You question not only my word, but the divine will?" His voice was calm, but laden with authority. Ad-Bani watched in fascination as the king walked up to one of the temple's large windows, where the rays of the setting sun entered directly. "Look," exclaimed Hammurabi. "Shamash is enlightening us right now with his presence. The laws he brings us do not distinguish between noble and common. For before the gods, we must all answer for our actions." The moment was so dramatic that the young scribe almost dropped his stylus. Nosin, who was standing nearby, let out a small smile of approval. The nobleman who had questioned the laws stepped back, visibly intimidated by the king's show of authority. That evening, after everyone had left, Ad-Bani remained in the temple, copying down the day's records. Marduk-Nasir joined him, carrying an extra lamp. "Do you understand now why we need divine authority?" asked the advisor. "Laws may be just and necessary, but it is the belief in their sacred origin that guarantees their acceptance." The young scribe reflected on the advisor's words as he continued his work. The tablets in his hands contained more than just rules and punishments. They were a reflection of the complex web of power, faith, and necessity that held society together. A movement caught his eye. It was Inanna, who had remained in the temple after the pronouncement on her case. She timidly approached his desk. "Will the words you record," she said, "bring justice to others like my brother?" Ad-Bani looked at the clay tablets, at his ink-stained hands, and then at the woman's hopeful face. "These laws," she answered carefully, "whether they come directly from Shamash or are inspired by his wisdom through the king, exist to protect people like you and your brother." As the night wore on, the young scribe continued his work, increasingly aware of the importance of his role. He was not just a recorder of laws, but a keeper of the memory of how justice was being transformed in his time. In the days that followed, the tension in the temple remained palpable. Ad-Bani noticed a significant increase in the number of guards, and conversations between the priests were increasingly reserved. Inanna's case had become a symbol of the change that the new laws promised, but it had also aroused resistance among those who saw their privileges threatened. One morning, while working on his boards, Ad-Bani noticed an unusual movement. A group of merchants had arrived from a distant city, bringing disturbing news. Other kingdoms were beginning to question Hammurabi's authority and his divinely inspired laws. The neighboring kings are afraid that their own people will demand similar laws, explained Marduk-Nasir, who had joined Ad-Bani at his desk. They say that no mortal should have the power to establish such sweeping laws, even if he claims divine inspiration. The young scribe continued his work, but his hands trembled slightly as he recorded the new decrees. The implications of the news were worrying. If other kingdoms opposed Hammurabi's laws, it could mean conflict, perhaps even war. Nosin appeared in the late afternoon, his face marked by concern. "The king has called a special assembly for tomorrow," he announced. All the nobles, priests, and representatives of the main classes must be present. Adad Bani, you will need to record every word even more carefully than usual. That night, the young scribe could hardly sleep. His thoughts were divided between the greatness of what he was helping to create and the dangers this creation faced. Through his small window, he watched the stars over Babylon, wondering if Shamash would really approve of everything that was being done in his name. The assembly began at dawn. The great hall of the temple was packed with representatives from all walks of life. Adad Bani took his usual place, preparing his clay tablets. He observed Inanna among the crowd. She now occupied a prominent place as a living example of the justice of the new laws. Hammurabi entered the hall with even greater solemnity than usual. His royal robe glittered with gold details, and his posture was that of someone who carried the weight not just of a kingdom, but of a divine mission. Shamash has shown me in a new vision, the king began, his voice echoing through the hall, that our laws must extend beyond the borders of our city. The sun god wants all peoples to know true justice. While recording the king's words, Adad Bani noticed different reactions among those present. Some nobles clearly looked uncomfortable, while merchants and craftsmen showed approval. No Sin maintained a neutral expression, but his attentive eyes didn't miss a single detail. The king continued his speech, detailing how the laws would be applied in conquered or allied territories. He spoke about the need for trained scribes to copy and disseminate the code, and about how the temples of Shamash and other cities would serve as centers for the administration of justice. During a pause, Marduk Nasir discreetly approached Adad Bani. The king is playing a dangerous game, he whispered. Using divine authority to expand political power is like walking on a knife. The young scribe nodded, understanding more and more the complex layers of meaning behind each law he recorded. It wasn't just about justice or social order. It was about power, legitimacy, and the delicate relationship between the divine and the earthly. The assembly continued until late afternoon, with different speakers taking turns to express support or concerns about the king's plans. Adad Bani meticulously recorded everything, his tireless hands transforming words into history engraved in clay. As the sun began to set, a dramatic moment captured everyone's attention. A ray of light came through one of the temple's tall windows, shining directly on where Hammurabi was sitting. The king stood up, bathed in golden light. "Look," exclaimed one of the priests. "Shamash himself blesses our king and his laws." Adad Bani watched the scene with fascination, but also noticed a subtle smile on Nosin's lips. The high priest had commented earlier on the importance of understanding how the sun moved through the temple windows throughout the day. After the assembly, while organizing his tablets, the young scribe was surprised by an unexpected visitor. It was the nobleman who had questioned the laws a few days earlier. His face was marked by a different expression now, no longer one of defiance, but of resignation mixed with curiosity. "Young scribe," he said quietly, "you who record these laws, do you truly believe that they come from the gods?" Adad Bani hesitated, carefully weighing his words. "I believe," he finally replied, "that true justice pleases the gods, regardless of its origin." The nobleman studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "Perhaps you're right," he murmured, turning away thoughtfully. That night, working by the light of his lamp, Adad Bani reflected on how the laws he was helping to record were changing not only society, but also the way people thought about justice, authority, and social order. Each tablet he completed was more than just a record. It was a brick in the construction of something truly revolutionary. As the new laws spread throughout the kingdom, Adad Bani noticed subtle but significant changes in Babylonian daily life. The flow of people seeking justice at the temple increased daily, and the young scribe noticed that they came not only from the city, but also from distant regions, attracted by the fame of Hammurabi's code. One particularly busy morning, while organizing his tablets, Adad Bani was surprised by an unusual group. They were scribes from other temples, sent to learn the new code of laws. The king had ordered that copies be distributed throughout the kingdom, and Adad Bani was assigned to train the new recorders. "You must teach them not only to copy the words," Nur Sin instructed, "but also to understand their deeper meaning. These laws will only work if those who record them truly understand their purpose. Among the visiting scribes was a young woman called Ninsan, something rare for the time. Her bright, attentive eyes reminded Adidbani of his own enthusiasm when he began his work at the temple. During the training sessions, she often asked insightful questions about the origin and purpose of the laws. "How can we be sure that we are interpreting Shamash's will correctly?" she asked one day, as they practiced recording a particularly complex case about property rights. Before Adidbani could answer, Mardik Nasir, who was supervising the training, intervened. "True wisdom," he said, "lies in recognizing that divine justice manifests itself through human understanding of the needs of our people." Working with the new scribes brought a new perspective for Adidbani. Each time he explained a law or its context, he better understood the complexity of what they had created. The stories of Inanna and others who had found justice through the code served as powerful examples for the apprentices. One day, while supervising the work of the scribes, Adidbani noticed an unusual commotion in the temple courtyard. Hammurabi had returned from a successful military campaign, bringing news that other kingdoms had agreed to adopt parts of the Code of Laws. "This is a victory greater than any military achievement," commented Nursin, watching the scribes at work. "Our laws are changing not only our city, but the entire known world." The expansion of the code brought new challenges. Different cultures and traditions needed to be considered, and Adidbani often found himself working with Mardik Nasir and other advisors to adapt the interpretations of the laws to different contexts. During this period, Inanna became a regular presence in the temple, helping to guide others who sought justice. Her story had become a symbol of hope, and she now worked actively to ensure that the new laws were applied fairly. "You see," she told Adidbani one day, "it doesn't matter whether these laws came directly from Shamash or through the king's wisdom. What matters is that they are changing lives." The young scribe agreed, remembering his own journey of discovery. From initial doubts about the divine origin of the laws to understanding their true meaning and impact. One afternoon, while working on his copies, Adidbani received an unexpected visitor. It was the nobleman who had murdered Inanna's brother, now serving his punishment through work and compensation to the family. "I've come to thank you," said the nobleman, surprising the scribe. "These laws, they made me see that no one is above justice, not even us, the privileged." That moment crystallized something that Adidbani had been realizing throughout his journey. Laws were not just a set of rules to be followed, but an instrument of social transformation that affected everyone, from the humblest to the most powerful. The work continued, and with it came new responsibilities. Hammurabi entrusted Adidbani with the task of creating a special compendium of the laws, including not only the decrees, but also examples of their application and the fundamental principles that guided them. "This will be his legacy," said Nursin, watching the young scribe work on the special tablets. "Long after we are all gone, these words will continue to guide people in their search for justice." As he completed his work on the compendium, Adidbani reflected on his own transformation. From a young scribe full of doubts, he had become not just a recorder of laws, but a guardian of something much greater. The idea that justice could be codified, understood, and applied universally. One evening, while finishing the last tablet of the compendium, Adidbani found Ninsan working alone in the temple. "Why do you choose to become a scribe?" she asked. "At first, I just wanted to record history," he replied after a moment's reflection. "But I've learned that sometimes by recording history, we help to create it." The sun set over Babylon, casting long shadows through the temple windows. Adidbani looked at his completed tablets, each containing not only laws, but also the stories of the people who had helped shape them. Hammurabi's code had become much more than a set of divinely inspired rules. It was a testament to the human capacity to seek and create justice. And so, in the ancient clay streets of Babylon, a silent revolution had taken place, engraved for eternity on clay tablets by a young scribe who learned that true justice is born from the harmony between the divine and the human, between authority and compassion, between tradition and change.